It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low and casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways among the ancient oaks lining the path. I sat in the passenger seat, fingers tightening around the worn leather strap of my bag, my eyes fixed on the looming silhouette ahead. The manor itself, it stood resolute yet decayed, like a forgotten relic, resisting the encroachment of time. Its stone walls bore the patina of 100 years, cracked and mottled, stained by centuries of rain and neglect. The windows, tall and narrow, stared blankly like dark eyes, some broken, others clouded with grime, reflecting the dying light. Behind me, the team murmured in quiet excitement and nerves. Maya was already fiddling with her camera, her brows furrowed in concentration. Jonas glanced warily around, hands never far from his jacket pockets where his small collection of tools and protective gear rested. Leela sat cross-legged amidst piles of cables and boxes, sketchpad in hand, her pale face illuminated by the screen of her tablet. Dr. Evelyn Marks, our scientific advisor and historian, sat primly, clipboard balanced on her knees, glasses perched low on her nose. Samir, our junior equipment manager, fidgeted with a tangle of wires, his baseball cap pulled low. "Here we are," I said quietly, stepping out and inhaling the chill that seemed to seep from the manor's walls themselves. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, mold, and something indefinably old, the smell of forgotten memories. I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This was not just another investigation. For me, it was personal. I had come here to find answers, to confront the unknown that had haunted me since the death of my sister. A puzzle of grief and unanswered questions that had driven me from the sterile halls of psychology clinics to the shadowed realms of the paranormal. The manor, infamous in local lore, whispered promises of truths hidden in its shifting corridors. We crossed the threshold into the grand foyer, the heavy door groaning in protest. Dust motes floated in the shafts of our flashlights, revealing faded grandeur beneath layers of decay. Ornate wallpaper peeled from the walls in curling strips. Chandeliers hung askew, their crystals dulled and broken. The floorboards creaked beneath our boots, a chorus of groans from the house itself. Somewhere in the depths, the faint drip of water echoed. "Set up here," I instructed, gesturing toward the center of the room, where the remnants of a once majestic rug lay mottled and threadbare. Maya began, unpacking her array of devices, EMF meters, digital recorders, infrared cameras, each piece humming with promise. Jonas moved to secure the perimeter, checking windows and doors with a sharp eye. Lila hovered near a cracked mirror, her fingers tracing its surface as if seeking to draw out the unseen. Dr. Marks busied herself, with notes on the manor's documented history, her skepticism a steady undercurrent against our mounting anticipation. Samir handled the cabling with nervous efficiency. As we worked, I felt a subtle shift, a barely perceptible change in the angles of the room, a doorway that seemed to narrow just beyond my peripheral vision. I blinked, and it was gone. I caught Maya's glance. She was frowning, fingers poised over a camera lens, but no one else seemed to notice. "Did you feel that?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "Feel what?" Maya asked, lowering the camera. "Like the room, breathing." I hesitated, the words tasting strange on my tongue. Lila shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her slender frame. "There's something here," she said softly, eyes distant. "Something watching." "Don't let the atmosphere get to you," Jonas grunted, voice low but firm. "We're here to investigate, not to get spooked." Dr. Marks interjected, adjusting her glasses. "Remember, this place has been empty for decades." What you're experiencing are the echoes of natural decay, nothing more. I wanted to believe her, clung to her rationality as an anchor. But deep down, a part of me knew this house was different, unnatural, alive in a way that defied explanation. Night fell swiftly, swallowing the last hues of dusk. The manor's shadows grew long and thick, pooling in corners and stretching down endless hallways. The wind picked up outside, rattling broken shutters and stirring dead leaves against the stone steps. Inside, the silence deepened, punctuated only by creaks and sighs from the settling house. We gathered around a small table, lit by a flickering lantern. I opened my journal, pen poised. Writing was my way of keeping the creeping dread at bay, of capturing reality before it slipped beyond reach. "We start tomorrow," I said quietly. "Document everything. Trust your instincts." As I wrote, my gaze drifted to a hallway opposite the foyer, impossibly long, stretching into darkness. For a moment, I swore I saw the walls pulse, edges blurring like smoke. Then they were still. The house had begun its work, and we were already inside its grasp. The night deepened, and with it, the sense that this was only the beginning of something far darker than any of us could imagine. The heavy wooden door groaned on its hinges, protesting our intrusion into a realm long abandoned, yet somehow unmistakably alive. Dust motes floated in the stale air, catching the last rays of daylight as if suspended in a fragile limbo. I tightened my grip on the journal in my backpack, a silent talisman against the unknown. "Let's get the equipment set up before night falls," I said, trying to steady my voice despite the nervous flutter in my chest. Around me, the team busied themselves unpacking cameras, EMF readers, and voice recorders, their movements brisk but tinged with a tension that was impossible to mask. Maya crouched near the grand staircase, her short black hair catching the light as she calibrated her devices. "This place is a tech nightmare," she muttered, scanning the peeling wallpaper and cracked banisters. "But the readings so far are interesting." Leela lingered near a cracked window, her pale face serene yet shadowed by something deeper. "I can feel it," she whispered, eyes closed. "Something here is heavy, sad." Dr. Evelyn Marks adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. "Emotional resonance is hardly scientific evidence," she countered, her tone measured but firm. "We need to focus on tangible data, not feelings." Jonas and Samir secured the perimeter, their eyes sharp and alert. Jonas's broad frame seemed to absorb the oppressive atmosphere, his jaw clenched in silent vigilance. We began our initial sweep of the manor's main hall and adjoining rooms, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet like whispered warnings. At first, the house seemed merely dilapidated, a relic of forgotten grandeur. But as we moved deeper, subtle oddities emerged. A door that hadn't been on the blueprints, a corridor that seemed longer than memory suggested, shadows that shifted at the edges of vision. Maya's EMF reader suddenly buzzed with alarming intensity in a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits. "Look at this," she said, holding up the device. The needles quivered wildly, the sound sharp and unrelenting. "I've never seen anything like it." I stepped closer, examining the peeling wallpaper and cracked plaster. The air felt charged, a static tension humming beneath the surface. Leela's hand trembled as she reached out, fingertips grazing the wall. "It's as if the house is breathing," she murmured. Dr. Marks frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Electromagnetic fluctuations can be caused by faulty wiring or hidden metal structures," she said. "This manor has been neglected for decades. There's bound to be interference." But I saw the way her eyes flicked to the door at the end of the corridor, one that none of us had noticed before. It was heavy and ornate, its dark wood warped by age, the iron handle cold and unyielding. I approached it cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. "When did this door appear?" I asked, voice low. No one had an answer. We all instinctively knew it had not been there moments ago. The room beyond was sealed tight, the faintest whisper of cold air slipping through the cracks. Lila shivered, her breath shallow. "There's something behind this door," she said, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Something watching." Jonas moved forward, hand on the butt of his pistol, scanning the shadows. "We need to keep moving," he urged. "We can't let this place get inside our heads." The rest of the team nodded, though unease curled in everyone's stomach. We pressed on, but the manor's subtle manipulations grew harder to ignore. Corridors shifted when we weren't looking. Familiar landmarks disappeared or morphed into something unfamiliar. The boundaries of the house seemed to blur, as if reality itself were bending to some inscrutable will. That night, as we gathered in the main hall to review our findings, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken fears. Maya pored over her equipment, Leela sat quietly sketching the door that had appeared, and Dr. Marks argued quietly with Jonas about the likelihood of natural explanations. I sat apart, journal open on my lap, fingers tracing the words I had written earlier. Something was happening here, something beyond logic or science. The house was alive, watching us, reshaping itself like a living nightmare, and we had only just begun to unravel its secrets. As the flames of the fireplace flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the cracked walls, I realized this was no ordinary investigation. The manor was a puzzle, a predator, and we were its unwitting prey. The creeping dread settled over me like a second skin, and I knew that the horrors to come would test every ounce of our sanity and resolve. But for now, the first signs were subtle, almost polite. A door where there was none, a whisper in the silence, a presence felt but unseen. The house was waking, and we were trapped inside its dream. Every step echoed strangely, as if the very ground beneath us was uncertain. I led the team cautiously through a narrow corridor that just moments before had ended in a dead end. Now, a door stood where none should be, its wood swollen and twisting like the limbs of some gnarled tree. My heart pounded in my chest, not simply from the physical exertion, but from the flood of memories that began to stir with terrifying clarity. The laughter of my sister Light, carefree and achingly familiar, echoed through the halls, distant yet unmistakable. It was a sound I had not heard in years, yet here it was, woven into the very fabric of this place. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was no longer in the manor, but back in the room where I last saw her alive. The sterile hospital lights flickered overhead as I tried to reach out to her, but the moment shattered like glass. I gasped, grounding myself against the wall, the cold wood pressing into my palm, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the memory. Jonas was not far behind, his imposing frame casting long shadows in the dim light. He moved with a wary grace, eyes scanning every corner, every shifting seam in the architecture. His jaw clenched tight, and his breaths came in measured bursts. I caught the tightening of his fists, the subtle twitch of his fingers near the holster at his side. Protective as ever, his presence was both a comfort and a warning that the house was becoming more hostile by the minute. Maya crouched near a scattering of our technical gear, her dark eyes darting between the flickering EMF meter and the erratic readings on her tablet. "This shouldn't be happening," she muttered, voice low and edged with frustration. "The sensors are picking up fluctuations that don't align with any known phenomenon. It's like the house is rewriting the rules as we go along." Her skepticism was a pillar for the team, but even she seemed rattled now. I noticed the tightness around her mouth, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the dials. Leela sat cross-legged on the cold floor, clutching her sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Her pale complexion was flushed, and beads of sweat dotted her forehead. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, and every so often she would whisper words I couldn't quite catch, as though speaking to unseen entities. Her drawings, though rough, depicted scenes of sorrow and despair, figures twisted in anguish, spectral forms reaching out from darkened doorways. "The house is showing me things," she said quietly, voice trembling. "Things that happened here long ago. It's like it wants us to understand, or maybe to suffer." Dr. Evelyn Marks, ever the skeptic, hovered near the doorway, arms crossed and eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Remember," she said firmly, "we must remain grounded in reality. These could all be manifestations of stress, suggestion, or group hysteria." But even her voice lacked conviction. Samir fidgeted beside her, his youthful energy dimmed by the thickening atmosphere. "I don't like this," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "It's like the house knows what we're afraid of." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that truth settle over us. The manor was no longer just a building. It was a living entity, an ancient predator feeding on our memories and fears. Every twist in the hall, every warped corner, was designed to unravel us. As I steadied myself against the wall, the image of my sister's face burned into my mind, her eyes wide with terror, the fading light behind her as she slipped away. I knew that the house was reaching deeper, pulling at the threads of my past. "We need to keep moving," I commanded, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "If we let it trap us in our memories, we'll never find a way out." Jonas nodded sharply, stepping forward with renewed resolve. Maya packed up her equipment swiftly, her skepticism giving way to grim acceptance. Leela rose unsteadily, clutching her sketches like sacred texts. Together, we ventured further into the manor's shifting maze, each corridor a mirror reflecting our fears back at us. The walls closed in, but our will to survive pressed outward. And deep within the manor's heart, the house waited patiently, sensing the stirrings of its praise, unraveling sanity. The night was far from over, and the memories it stirred promised no rest. But tonight, the house seemed to twist reality itself, folding corridors back upon one another in ways that defied any logical mapping. It was as if the walls breathed, inhaling and exhaling, reshaping the very space around us when we weren't looking. We had just left the main hall, a place that once must have been grand, but now lay draped in peeling wallpaper and shadow. Maya was fiddling with her handheld electromagnetic reader, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jonas moved ahead, his imposing figure a constant sentinel against whatever might lurk in the darkness. Lila trailed behind, her steps hesitant, eyes distant, and behind us, Dr. Evelyn Marks voiced her skepticism in that clipped tone she always adopted when confronted with the inexplicable. "This is just an old house playing tricks on our senses," she said, her voice echoing faintly against the warped walls. "The mind fills in the gaps. We've been here too long." But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, watching us, weaving a web of distorted memories and impossible geometry. We turned a corner, and I realized we were back where we started. The ornate molding on the ceiling seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. A door appeared where there had been none before, its wood swollen and cracked, yet somehow inviting. Lila sank to the floor in a small side room, bathed in the sickly light of a flickering bulb. Her eyes closed, her breath shallow and rapid. Around her, the air shimmered with translucent images, ghostly scenes of sorrow and violence. She sketched furiously, fingers stained with charcoal, capturing the moments her mind conjured from the house's depths. "Their memories," she whispered, voice trembling. "The house shows me what it's lived through." Jonas's patience snapped as he slammed his fist against a wall, the sound muffled by the thickening atmosphere. "We can't keep wandering in circles," he growled, eyes darting nervously. "This place is messing with us. We need a plan." Maya's instruments sputtered, lights flickering erratically. "The readings are off the charts," she said, voice edged with disbelief. "There's something here, something unnatural." Dr. Marks adjusted her glasses, glancing warily at the twisting hallway outside the warped window that pulsed faintly, almost like a breathing eye. "I don't know what to make of this," she admitted, voice low, "but it's beyond anything I've encountered in my research." The tension between us thickened, the air growing heavy with unspoken fears. Paranoia crept into the corners of my mind, whispering that the house wasn't just warping space, it was warping us. Our memories, our perceptions, even our trust in one another. As night deepened, the manor's grip tightened. The line between waking and dreaming slipped away, leaving only the fracturing reality of the house's endless, shifting nightmare. We were trapped, not only by walls and doors, but by the very fabric of our own minds, unraveling beneath the house's merciless gaze. I closed my eyes, trying to anchor myself in what I knew to be real. But even then, I wondered if the house had already rewritten my memories, twisting them into the shape of its dark, insatiable hunger. Our first order of business that morning was clear: to map this twisting, shifting place in any way we could. If the house was changing beneath our feet, we needed a record, a baseline to anchor ourselves against the madness. I sat at a rickety desk in one of the manor's many forgotten studies, my journal open before me. The pages, once crisp, were now dog-eared and stained with smudges of dust and damp. I had been meticulous, recording every detail, every sensation, every strange occurrence since our arrival. But today, as I reread my entries, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Words I was certain I'd never written stared back at me in ink. Cryptic phrases twisted into dark omens, sentences that warped the meaning of my own thoughts. "Elliot," Maya called from across the room, her voice tight with disbelief. She was hunched over her laptop, headphones pressed against her ears. I rose and crossed the cluttered space, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. "Listen to this," she said, eyes wide, fingers trembling as she replayed her latest recording. The room filled with a static-laden hum, but beneath it, whispers slithered through the noise, faint, indecipherable murmurs that had no place in the natural world. "What is that?" I asked, leaning in. "I don't know," she admitted. "It wasn't there when I recorded it earlier. The equipment was fine." And then this showed up. Jonas stepped into the room, his usual stoic expression creased with concern. "This place is playing tricks on us," he muttered. "I don't like it." We gathered around the large map spread on the floor, our best attempt to chart the manor's sprawling wings. Yet when we compared it to our earlier sketches, the layout seemed to shift before our eyes. Hallways we'd mapped yesterday had vanished, replaced by unfamiliar doorways leading into darkness. The manor was rewriting itself, erasing our progress and isolating us further. "It's like the house is alive," Lila whispered, her fingers tracing the faded lines as if seeking to hold the shifting architecture steady. Dr. Marks, ever the skeptic, frowned. There must be a rational explanation, perhaps structural collapse or our own disorientation. But even she could not hide the tremor in her voice. Samir, usually eager to assist, looked pale as he fiddled nervously with his equipment. I'm not sure this is just disorientation anymore, he said, glancing over his shoulder. As the day wore on, the manor's influence tightened its grip. I returned reluctantly to my journal, desperate to find some consistency amid the chaos. But each time I read, the words shifted, the narrative twisting into something dark and unknowable. The house was not merely haunting. Usit was rewriting us. We can't trust our memories, I muttered, voice barely audible. Or our recordings. Maya nodded grimly. And if we can't trust our tools, how do we fight back? The oppressive silence of the manor pressed in around us, broken only by the faint creak of settling wood and the distant drip of water. The house's unseen presence loomed, a predator stalking the edges of our sanity. As night fell, I sat alone in the study, the journal open on my lap. The once familiar words blurred and shifted beneath my gaze. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the windows, the manor waited, patient and hungry, reshaping itself, and us with every passing moment. And I could not help but wonder if even our memories were not safe here. What chance did we have to escape? The manor's walls whispered promises and threats alike, and I was left clutching at the fragile thread of reality, desperately trying to hold on before the house swallowed me whole. The night stretched long and merciless, the shifting shadows dancing just beyond the candlelight. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the broken panes, and inside, the house dreamed, ever watching, ever waiting. I closed the journal, the words now settling into a terrifying new form. Tomorrow, we would try again. But deep inside, I feared we were already lost. The unseen changes had begun, and with them, the true nightmare was just awakening. At first, it was the kind of cold that any ancient stone building might hold, the slow seep of age and neglect. But as we advanced, I became aware of something more insidious, something alive in the walls themselves. It was Maya who noticed first. Her voice, usually steady and measured, wavered as she whispered, "Did that door just disappear?" I turned, eyes darting back to the corridor we'd just passed through, only to find it replaced by a continuous stretch of unfamiliar hallway. The faded wallpaper peeled and curled in the dim light, but the layout was completely alien. There was no sign of the doorframe, no hint of the exit we'd just used. A slow, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Everyone," I said, my voice firmer than I felt, "we're trapped." Jonas immediately stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared like a shield between us and the unknown. His shaved head caught the weak glow of the lantern as he swept his gaze along the walls, flashlight in hand, every muscle taut. His protective instincts flared, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "No way out that way," he muttered. Behind us, Lila pressed her hands to the wall, her fingers trembling against the cracked plaster. She didn't speak at first, but her pale face tightened with anxiety, eyes darting to shadows that seemed to stretch and twist beyond the natural. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's watching us. The house. It's alive." Maya frantically adjusted her equipment, the flickering screens illuminating the fear etched on her face. Her fingers flew over the controls, trying to find some logical explanation for the sudden shift, but the readings were erratic, fluctuating wildly. "This doesn't make any sense," she said, the scientific part of her mind wrestling with the impossible. "The electromagnetic activity is spiking, but none of this fits any known pattern." Dr. Marks, ever the skeptic, pinched the bridge of her nose, her glasses slipping slightly down. "It's psychological," she insisted, though even her voice betrayed uncertainty. "Stress and fatigue can cause disorientation." But none of us believed her. Not truly. Samir, younger and visibly shaken, clutched his baseball cap, eyes wide. "We need to mark our path, something to help us remember." I nodded, pulling out a roll of chalk from my pack. We began marking arrows and tallying signs on the corners, but even with these efforts, the manor seemed to swallow our marks. The symbols faded or were covered by new, impossible angles that hadn't been there moments before. I felt my heartbeat quicken as the walls seemed to pulse, the air thickening with a strange, metallic scent. The manor was no longer just a building. It was a living entity, reshaping itself around us, isolating us in an ever-shifting nightmare. Jonas's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "We stick together. No one wanders off." We moved cautiously, every step uncertain, the manor's maze-like corridors folding and twisting. I caught glimpses of my teammates' faces in the dim light, Maya's sharp eyes darting nervously over her equipment, Leela's pale, haunted countenance etched with fear, Jonas's rigid frame tense and alert. At one point, I found myself pressed against a cold wall, breath shallow. A sudden draft carried faint whispers, barely audible, like the house was breathing secrets directly into our ears. I thought I saw a door flicker into existence down a side hall, only for it to vanish when I blinked. The oppressive atmosphere thickened, and a creeping dread settled over us all. This was no longer an investigation. It was a test of survival. "Elliot," Leela's voice trembled beside me. "The house is feeding on us. Our fear, our memories. It's gaining strength." Her words echoed my own fears. We were not just trapped by walls and doors. We were ensnared by the manor's malevolent will. As night deepened outside, the manor's darkness pressed heavier. Every corridor seemed to stretch longer, every shadow deeper. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally, and the familiar rhythm of time fractured. Jonas's protective stance never wavered, but even he was not immune to the growing tension. I caught him scanning corners with a hardness I hadn't seen before, a mixture of resolve and desperation. Maya's equipment continued to malfunction unpredictably, the glowing displays casting eerie light over her anxious face. She muttered under her breath, trying to recalibrate, but the numbers made no sense, as if reality itself was fraying. We tried to communicate, to plan, but the manor's shifting architecture made coordination nearly impossible. Each attempt to retrace our steps led us deeper into the labyrinth. I scribbled in my journal, my hands shaking, trying to anchor myself to what little reality remained. But even my writing seemed to warp, letters twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. Is there any way out? I asked no one in particular, the weight of hopelessness pressing down. Jonas's grim expression was the only answer I needed. As we pressed forward, the manor seemed to close in around us, its ancient bones creaking with a sinister life. We were no longer visitors, we were prisoners, caught in a nightmare that shifted as we dared to dream of escape. And in the depths of my mind, I felt the first true crack in my resolve. The house was hungry, and it had us exactly where it wanted. But I would not let it break me, not yet. The walls whispered secret promises and threats as we moved deeper into the maze, each step a gamble between sanity and surrender. Every shadow might be watching, every corner hiding horrors born from our own memories twisted beyond recognition. I swallowed hard and pressed on, the faint glow of my flashlight the only beacon in this living nightmare. Whatever the manor was, it was testing us. and I was determined to find a way through the darkness or die trying. But as the corridor ahead bent impossibly, folding back on itself like a serpent swallowing its tail, I realized this was only the beginning. The house was far from done with us. Lila sat cross-legged on the worn floorboards of what had once been a drawing room, her eyes half closed and her pencil scratching feverishly across the page. The flickering lantern beside her cast long shadows, making the corners of the room seem to breathe in the dim light. "It's happening again," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see them, the faces, the broken ones." Maya crouched nearby, her tablet recording every movement, every tremor in Lila's hand. "What do you see? Tell us." Lila's eyes snapped open, glassy and distant. Children hiding, their eyes wide with fear. A woman weeping, clutching a shattered locket. Blood staining the floorboards. Elliot approached cautiously, the familiar knot tightening in his chest. "Are they memories, or something the house is showing you?" Lila shook her head slowly. "I think both. The house feeds on pain. It reveals the past to trap us in it." Jonas shifted uneasily, his usual stoicism faltering. "This place is a nightmare come to life. We can't let it break us." Dr. Evelyn Marks, standing near the doorway, adjusted her glasses, her expression a mixture of skepticism and unease. "History is full of tragedy, but we must separate fact from fiction." But the sketches Lila produced told a story that words could not. Dark figures lurking behind cracked walls, faces twisted in silent screams, rooms drenched in sorrow. Each image a fragment of a history soaked in blood and despair. Later, Elliot found himself alone in a narrow corridor, the walls seeming to close in with every step. The cold seeped into his bones, and memories he had long buried clawed their way to the surface. His sister's laughter, the sharp crack of the accident, the hollow silence that followed. The manor seemed to echo his grief, wrapping it in shadows and whispers. He pressed a hand against the peeling wallpaper, feeling the rough texture beneath his palm. "I'm not alone," he thought, even as the weight of loss threatened to consume him. "The house knows. It's using me." Back in the drawing room, the team huddled around Lila's latest sketches, the flickering lantern casting ghostly light on their faces. Maya scrolled through the recordings, her brow furrowed. "There's a pattern here. The tragedies, the visions, they're connected." Jonas nodded grimly. "We're not just dealing with a haunted house. It's a trap, a predator that feeds on our fears." Dr. Marks sighed, the skepticism in her eyes giving way to a quiet dread. "If this house truly remembers, then it's more powerful than we imagined." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the manor's hall, rattling the lantern and sending papers fluttering like frightened birds. The walls seemed to pulse, the house itself alive and watching. Jonas tightened his grip on his flashlight, scanning the shadows as distant, mournful cries echoed down the corridors. Lila's voice broke the silence. "It's coming for us." Elliot swallowed hard, the fragile thread of hope fraying. "Then we have to be ready. Whatever this house is, it's not done with us yet." As the night deepened, the manor's secrets unfolded slowly, each vision, each sketch, pulling the team deeper into the nightmare. The past and present collided, and the line between memory and reality blurred into a chilling dance of shadows and fear. Elliot knew the house was no mere building, it was a living nightmare, and they were trapped inside its darkest dream. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a stubborn ember of resolve burned in Elliot's chest. He would fight the darkness, confront the ghosts of his past, and protect the team. Because if the house fed on memory and fear, then perhaps the strength to survive lay in remembering who they weren't, refusing to be consumed. The manor waited, patient and insidious, its walls shifting quietly when no one was watching. And somewhere inside, a silent scream echoed a call that only the brave or the broken would answer. The night was far from over. It was as if the walls themselves had conspired against us, conspiring to amplify every whispered doubt and simmering suspicion. I could feel my heart thrum unevenly beneath my ribs, a nervous drumbeat that echoed the unrest growing among us. Jonas had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but tonight, his usual guarded pragmatism gave way to a raw, volatile edge. We had been exploring one of the manor's narrower hallways when the flicker appeared in indistinct shadow that danced just beyond the reach of our flashlights. At first, it was a trick of the light, or so I wanted to believe. But the others saw it too, their breaths hitching as the darkness seemed to writhe and pulse. Suddenly, Jonas was moving fast, aggressive. "Get back," he barked, raising his fist to strike at the shifting form. The apparition twisted and recoiled, a fleeting silhouette of something human yet impossibly distorted. His blow met only empty air, but the sound of his shout ricocheted through the corridor, shattering the fragile calm. Maya's voice cut through the charged silence. "Jonas, stop. You're only feeding whatever this thing is. We need to observe, not attack." Her tone was firm, laced with frustration that I recognized well, the frustration of a scientist wrestling with phenomena that refused to fit her neat hypotheses. Dr. Evelyn Marks nodded sharply, her skepticism hardening her features. "Hayes right," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Violence will only escalate the situation. We need to remain objective. Remember, fear is the enemy here." Jonas's chest heaved, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and helplessness. "Objective. This place is warping our minds. It's not just fear, it's real. We're under threat." His gaze swept the group, landing on each of us as if searching for an ally. But the unease was mirrored in all our faces. Lila, usually quiet and withdrawn, shivered in a shadowed corner. Her hands clutched her sketchbook tightly, the pages fluttering as if stirred by a ghostly breeze. "It's watching us," she whispered, voice trembling. "I can feel it. It's feeding on our fear, twisting it into something worse." Samir shifted nervously, tugging at the brim of his baseball cap. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, the usual calm technician now a bundle of fraying nerves. "Maybe we should just leave," he muttered, but the words seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence. I raised my hands, trying to steady the group, to pull us back from the brink. "We can't let this place divide us. We need to stay focused, work together. The house wants us fractured, vulnerable. We have to resist." But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of doubt pressing down, the edges of my own resolve fraying. Maya knelt beside me, her recorder still humming softly in her hands. "Elliot, look at the data. These readings, EMF spikes, temperature drops, they're too precise to be random. The house is reacting to us, to our emotions. We need to keep calm, analyze what's happening." Her voice was steady, but the flicker of fear in her eyes betrayed the strain. The corridors seemed to narrow, the shadows thickening until they were almost tangible. Every creak and groan of the ancient structure echoed like a sinister whisper. I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my archer, fleeting figure, half seen and impossible to place. My breath caught, and a cold wave of paranoia washed over me. Jonas stepped forward again, fists clenched. "I don't care if it's some ghost or not. If it's threatening us, we fight back. And if you're wrong," Maya countered sharply, You could make this worse." The argument spiraled, voices rising, accusations thinly veiled beneath fear and frustration. The fragile trust we'd maintained snapped like a thread under pressure. Leela's pale face crumpled as she retreated further into herself, her sketches now frantic scrawls of twisted shapes and dark eyes. I caught Samir's gaze, wide and haunted. "This place is breaking us," he whispered, "and I don't know if we'll make it out together." The manor seemed to pulse with malevolent glee, as if feeding on our discord. The walls shifted subtly, corridors bending and twisting beyond reason. Doors appeared where none had been, and familiar rooms vanished or receded into shadow. Every step felt heavier, every glance over a shoulder loaded with suspicion. I tried to anchor myself in logic, in the memories of who we were before this place began to unravel us. But the house was a cunning predator, weaving our fears into a web that tightened with every heartbeat. "We have to trust each other," I said quietly, voice barely carrying over the tense air, "or this place will consume us one by one." But already, the line between friend and foe was blurring, and the creeping dread had taken root deep in our hearts. The shadows lengthened, and the house waited, patient, insidious, dreaming. The corridor grew colder still as we regrouped near the heart of the manor. Jonas's outburst had left the room charged, the silence thick with unspoken fears. Maya's recorder lay on the floor between us, its red light blinking steadily as it captured the ambient noise, distant creaks, faint whispers, and the occasional sharp intake of breath. "We can't let this break us," Maya insisted, her voice low but resolute. "If we let paranoia take hold, the house wins. We need to keep our heads clear." Dr. Marks gave a curt nod, though her eyes betrayed her own shaken skepticism. "Elliot, what's your plan? How do we prevent this from spiraling further?" I swallowed hard, aware of how fragile my own will had become. "We'll keep moving, keep documenting. We stay vigilant, but we have to listen to each other and to what the house is showing us. If it's feeding on our fears, then maybe understanding those fears is the key." Leela's eyes flickered up from her sketchbook. "The visions are getting stronger. I think it's trying to tell us something." "Then we listen," I said, trying to infuse my words with certainty, "together." But as I spoke, a creeping sensation curled along my spine, the unmistakable feeling that the house was watching, waiting, ready to exploit the smallest fracture in our resolve. The night stretched on, and the manor breathed around us, a living nightmare that refused to let go. Moments later, Jonas stood by a cracked window, staring out into the moonlit grounds. His jaw was tight, muscles coiled like a spring. "I'm not letting this place get the better of me," he muttered. Maya approached cautiously. "We all want to survive, Jonas, but fighting shadows won't save us." He turned sharply, eyes flashing. "Sometimes you have to fight the darkness head on." I stepped between them, feeling the weight of their clashing wills. "We're stronger if we face this as a team. The house wants us divided. Don't give it that." Jonas hesitated, then nodded slowly, though the tension lingered like a storm cloud. The manor shifted again, a soft groan echoing through the walls as if in response. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the house's dark pulse quicken. We were trapped, not just by the physical maze, but by the venomous threads of paranoia weaving through our minds. And the worst was yet to come. In the quiet moments before dawn, I found myself alone in the library, the room's shadows deep and shifting. Leela's sketches lay scattered on the floor, each image a distorted echo of the manor's haunted past. I picked one upper figure trapped in twisting corridors, eyes wide with terror. There was no denying it anymore. The house was alive. It was feeding on us, shaping our fears, tearing at the fragile bonds between us. And as the first pale light of morning crept through the stained glass, I wondered how long we could hold on before the manor claimed us all. The line between friend and foe had all but vanished, and the creeping dread that filled the manor's walls had begun to seep into our bones. We were prisoners of our own fears, and the house that dreamed, was the nightmare that would not end. The night was far from over. Every step echoed with a hollow resonance that wasn't just the sound of our boots on rotting floorboards. It was the manor itself, breathing, watching, waiting. I found myself drawn to a neglected corner of what once must have been the grand library. Shelves sagged under the weight of dust-caked tomes and brittle papers, their spines cracked and faded. There, half hidden beneath a collapsed shelf, I spotted a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained with age. My heart pounded as I knelt, brushing the dust away with tentative fingers. Opening the journal, I recognized the handwriting immediately. Dommy Ellis, the caretaker who had abandoned the manor years ago after his own inexplicable experiences. Flickering the candle closer, I traced the scrawled entries, the words jagged and desperate. Tommy's accounts spoke of shifting walls, voices in the dark, and shadows that moved of their own volition. He wrote of a malevolent force that fed on memory and fear, trapping victims in an endless labyrinth of their own minds. The parallels to our own ordeal were unmistakable, and a cold shiver crawled down my spine. I called the team to me. Maya, ever skeptical but visibly shaken, adjusted her recorder and scrolled through her readings. The electromagnetic anomalies she had captured earlier grew stronger by the hour. Yet no logical explanation could account for the manor's behavior. Jonas, his usual stoic guard slipping, scanned the corridors with growing suspicion, muscles taut and ready. Leela sat nearby, her sketchbook clutched tightly, her eyes distant as if seeing beyond the veil of reality into the manor's dark soul. The manor seemed to respond to our discovery. As I read aloud passages from Tommy's journal, the walls around us groaned and shifted subtly. The floor beneath our feet creaked, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. Maya's recorder crackled, and a faint whisper threaded through the static, indistinct but chilling. Samir, usually the quietest of us, swallowed hard, his youthful face pale. I caught the tremor in his hands as he adjusted the equipment. We pressed on, navigating the twisting corridors that now felt less like a house and more like a sentient trap. The manor played tricks on our senses. Familiar doorways vanished, replaced by impossible angles and looping hallways that led us back to where we began. Our memories felt unreliable, fragmented by the house's influence. I struggled to hold onto my own sense of self, but even my journal, the one thing I trusted, showed signs of tampering. Words I was certain I had written were now altered, sometimes erased entirely. Lila's condition worsened. Her mediumship, once a source of insight, became a conduit for the manor's torment. She spoke of ghostly figures from the manor's past, their faces twisted with agony and rage. Her sketches grew frantic, filled with disjointed images of suffering and despair that seemed to bleed off the pages. One evening, as she sat cross-legged in a dim corner, her breath came in shallow gasps and her eyes fluttered behind closed lids. I feared for her sanity. Jonas remained our bulwark, though even he could not mask the cracks forming beneath his tough exterior. There were moments when he would freeze, staring into the shadows as if expecting a phantom to emerge. His hands clenched and unclenched, his protective instincts battling the creeping hopelessness that the manor instilled. Maya attempted to anchor us with her technology, but the manor mocked her efforts. Devices flickered and died, recordings distorted beyond recognition. Yet, amidst the static, occasional fragments of whispers and cries emerged, echoes of lives long extinguished but never truly gone. Maya's skepticism wavered, replaced by a cautious acceptance that we were entangled in something far beyond scientific explanation. Each night, as the manor's grip tightened, our dreams bled into waking hours. Time lost meaning, minutes stretched and contracted, memories folded upon themselves. The house fed on our fear and trauma, growing stronger with each fragment it devoured. I felt my own past clawing its way to the surface. Visions of my sister's death mingled with the manor's shadows, indistinguishable and relentless. In a fleeting moment of lucidity, I realized that the manor was a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and regrets back at us, warped and magnified. The journals of Tommy Ellis were not just records, they were warnings. Warnings we had yet to fully comprehend. As I closed the worn pages, the whispering grew louder, surrounding us in a suffocating embrace. The echoes in the dark were no longer distant, they were here, among us, and the house was listening. "We have to keep moving," I urged, voice barely above a whisper. But the dread weighed heavy, and I knew the hardest trials were still ahead. The manor was no longer just a place. It was a living nightmare, and we were its prey. But as we moved deeper into the shifting corridors, it became painfully clear that the manor was no longer merely a backdrop to our investigation. It was the puppeteer pulling the strings. The hallway ahead stretched out like a twisted serpent, its familiar wallpaper peeling and curling in new places, the ornate molding warped in impossible angles. We paused, exchanging uneasy glances, each step forward feeling like a betrayal of the last. Maya's voice broke the silence, sharp with frustration. "My EMF readers are going haywire. The readings spike and drop in a way that makes no sense." Her hands shook slightly as she toggled through settings on her handheld device, but no amount of fiddling could steady the static that crackled through the speakers. The flickering of the old chandeliers above cast elongated shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shadows that danced just at the edge of our vision. Samir's usually steady frame betrayed him now. I caught the tremor in his grip as he tightened his hold around the flashlight, the beam jittering wildly as his breath hitched in his throat. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, eyes wide and scanning the dark recesses beyond the dim light. I swallowed hard, the cold air pressing against my skin as a faint, indistinct whisper seemed to ripple through the hall. It was impossible to pinpoint. Was it the wind, or something else entirely? Our surroundings seemed to conspire against clarity. Doors appearing where none should be. Corridors folding back onto themselves like the walls were breathing. Dr. Evelyn Marks stood slightly apart, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The skeptical edge that had defined her since our arrival was still present, but I saw it falter as a soft murmur echoed close to her error voice, barely audible, calling her name. Her eyes darted around, searching for a source, but finding none. The rigid posture she maintained softened, uncertainty flickering across her face. This can't be real," she murmured, more to herself than to us. "It is," I said quietly. "We're caught in the manor's design. It's not just the physical structure, it's the house itself, reshaping and reshuffling to trap us." Jonas stepped forward, his broad shoulders tense, fists clenched at his sides. "We need to stay focused," he said with a low growl. "Panic won't help us." But panic was already setting in. The manor was feeding on our fear, twisting it into a tangible presence that lurked in the shifting walls. Our attempts to map the layout felt futile. Every corridor we marked vanished or morphed when we weren't looking. The concept of a fixed place was slipping away, replaced by a labyrinthine nightmare. I reached for my journal, hoping to find grounding in the familiar act of recording. But as I flipped through the pages, the words seemed to shimmer, rearranging themselves before my eyes. Was the house altering my memories? Our reality was crumbling, and with it, our trust in what we knew. Maya's voice cracked as she said, "I thought I could explain this scientifically. I thought I could prove there's a rational explanation. But this defies everything I believed." Her confession hung heavy in the stale air. Even the skeptic was bending under the weight of the manor's influence. The team's cohesion frayed, fear gnawing at the edges of our resolve. I tried to steady my breath as the shadows curled tighter around us, the house whispering secrets we could barely comprehend. The question echoed in my mind: how do you fight an enemy that changes its form the moment you look away? And as the walls shifted once more, swallowing a corridor whole, I realized that the true horror was not just the house itself, but the way it was unraveling the fragile threads that held us together. The manor was no longer just a place. It was a predator, and we were caught in its gaze. But I promised myself, even as dread seeped into my bones, I would find a way out, or die trying. And with that, we pressed forward into the shadows among us. I sat alone in the far corner of what had once been a sitting room, now reduced to a husk of faded grandeur. The silence around me was thick enough to choke on, but it was not empty. It pulsed with a subtle, oppressive presence that seemed to seep from the very walls. My mind was a chaotic theater, memories tangled with hallucinations, each indistinguishable from the other. I blinked, and the dim outline of my sister's face flickered before my eyes, only to dissolve into the warped silhouette of the manor's ever-shifting architecture. The boundaries between what was real and what was conjured by this cursed place were dissolving like mist. I rubbed my eyes and forced myself to breathe steadily, grounding my thoughts. "Get a grip," I whispered to the empty room. But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the thickening air. Elsewhere, Lila was a fragile figure, trembling against the cold stone wall of the hallway. Her long dark hair clung damply to her pale face, eyes wide and glassy as ghostly whispers wove through the air like silk threads, caressing her ears with voices only she could hear. Her trembling hand clutched a sketchpad, the charcoal lines jagged and frantic, depicting faces contorted in silent screams and shadowed forms that writhed in the corners of perception. "Leela," I called softly, approaching her with cautious steps. Her gaze flickered briefly to me, but it was as if she saw through me, caught in a reverie that bordered on terror. "We need to stay together." She nodded faintly, swallowing hard as another shiver ran through her. "They're here," she whispered, voice breaking. "They want to tell us things, but it's like a scream inside my head." Maya was hunched over her laptop in the main hall, her fingers flying across the keyboard as her sharp eyes flicked between graphs and screens displaying the manor's erratic electromagnetic fluctuations. She was arguing again with Dr. Evelyn Marks, whose skeptical gaze was steady and unyielding. "You can't explain this with science," Maya insisted, frustration thickening her voice. "These readings are off the charts. Something is here, Evelyn. Something beyond any known phenomenon." Dr. Marks tightened her lips. "Or it's interference, faulty equipment, or your imagination. We need concrete evidence, not conjecture fueled by fear." Jonas stood near the entrance, broad shoulders hunched as he scanned the doorways that seemed to shift subtly in his peripheral vision. His vigilance was a thin barrier against the mounting paranoia. "We can't afford to split up again," he said gruffly, voice low. "This place plays tricks. We stick close, watch each other's backs." Samir's voice cracked from the adjacent room, panic barely contained. "Guys, my Girrit's going haywire. The cameras are glitching, and the audio's picking up static like screams. I can't tell if it's the house or my mind playing tricks." I moved toward him, the hairs on my neck prickling as the shadows seemed to pulse and shift with every step. When I reached him, his face was pale, eyes darting wildly. "Breathe, Samir. We're all feeling it." The manor was alive, a slithering entity feeding on our fears and memories, twisting them into nightmares we could not escape. Each crack in our sanity widened, threatening to swallow us whole. That night, sleep was a battleground. The line between dreams and reality blurred until I no longer knew if I had ever truly closed my eyes. Faces from my past haunted me, my sister's laughter echoing, then fading into anguished cries. The manor's corridors twisted endlessly, folding back on themselves in impossible geometries. I woke, gasping, drenched in cold sweat, the candle's flame flickering wildly before sputtering out. Lila's whispers became screams, her sketches more frantic and chaotic, revealing glimpses of the manor's tragic history in grotesque detail. Maya's skepticism was faltering, her scientific mind grappling with phenomena that defied logic. Jonas's protective stance grew more desperate, and Dr. Marx's skepticism began to waver in the face of undeniable evidence. We were fracturing, each fissure in our minds mirrored by the manor's shifting walls. The house was not just a place, but a predator patient, insidious and merciless. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. "We have to hold on," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. "If we lose ourselves here, the house wins." But the question loomed, heavy and relentless. How much of us would remain when the dawn finally came? That night, the house ceased to be a mere structure of decaying wood and stone, becoming instead a crucible of our darkest memories, manifesting our traumas in ways so vivid and intimate that escape felt impossible. Jonas was the first to falter. We had been exploring the narrow west wing, a segment of the manor that seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its walls subtly shifting, hallways elongating and bending like the limbs of some grotesque creature. He lagged behind, his broad frame tense, eyes darting nervously as if chased by unseen shadows. Then it happened. The flickering light of his flashlight caught a figure at the end of a corridoran apparition. Indistinct at first, but gradually sharpening into the unmistakable visage of a fallen comrade from Jonas's past military unit. The man's eyes held no anger, yet his silent accusation was palpable. Jonas froze, his breath shallow, the echo of distant gunfire and shouted commands reverberating around him. I could see the weight of survivor's guilt press down on him like a physical force, his body rigid with anguish. The apparition reached out, fingers trembling, but then vanished, leaving Jonas trembling and speechless. Maya, ever the rationalist, tried to shake off the encounter, retreating to her equipment to analyze the anomalies we were witnessing. But the manor had other plans. Her recorder, which had been sputtering, static, suddenly played back a distorted video of her mentor's final moments. Mentor lost to an unexplained event that had haunted Maya since her youth. The image was fragmented, the audio a cacophony of whispers that seemed to weave into the fabric of the manor itself. Watching the footage, Maya's confident composure cracked. Her hands trembled, and for a moment, she was lost between scientific curiosity and raw emotional pain. The house had found a way to pry open her carefully guarded skepticism. I found myself drawn to a quieter, shadowed room where memories of my sister lurked like ghosts. The walls here seemed to pulse, closing in with an oppressive weight that pressed against my chest. Suddenly, a spectral vision appeared my sister's face, blurred and shifting, her voice a fractured whisper that twisted with each syllable. The memories she spoke of were not the comforting ones I had clung to, but distorted fragments that morphed into nightmares. I reached out, desperate to hold on to the truth, but the vision slipped through my fingers like smoke, leaving me haunted and raw. Leela was barely holding herself together. I found her hunched over her sketchpad in one of the manor's rooms that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Her hands shook violently as she tried to capture the surreal images flooding her mind spirits, entwining with the walls. Faces pressed against glass that wasn't there, and shadows that moved with intent. Around her, the air felt thick and alive, charged with a spiritual turmoil that was almost suffocating. Her breath came in short gasps as she whispered to unseen presences, her anxiety bleeding into the room like a tangible force. Dr. Evelyn Marks watched all this with a mixture of skepticism and growing concern, while Samir's usual nervous energy was replaced by a palpable dread. The manor's influence was fracturing us, isolating us within our own fears and memories. As these hauntings unfolded, the manor pulsed with a malevolent hunger, feeding on our trauma and growing stronger. Its shifting architecture was no longer just a physical barrier, but a psychological prison, a maze woven from our pain and fear. Each manifestation seemed tailored, a cruel mirror reflecting the darkest corners of our minds. We tried to regroup, but the strain was evident. Conversations faltered, eyes avoided each other, and trust began to erode. The house was winning, and with every passing moment, the line between reality and nightmare blurred further. I found myself clutching my journal, my only fragile anchor to sanity as the house whispered its secrets through the walls. The night stretched endlessly, filled with shadows and echoes, with memories turned to monsters. The question that gnawed at me was clear. How could we possibly defeat a force that knew us better than we knew ourselves, one that thrived on our fear and fractured pasts? Our survival depended not just on physical escape, but on confronting the broken fragments of our own souls, a terrifying prospect in a place that dreamed with the memories of the lost. As dawn threatened to break, the house fell silent for a moment, as if watching, waiting for us to break. But we were not done yet. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the dread and despair, a stubborn flicker of resolve remained. It was far too loud to be the wind, and far too deliberate. The others stirred, each stirred by the same creeping unease. The oppressive silence that usually clung to the manor was shattered, replaced by a cacophony of whispers curling just beyond the edge of comprehension. They seemed to seep from the very walls, a susurrus of voices blending into a sound that was at once intimate and alien. "Did you hear that?" Maya's voice broke the tension, her practical tone barely masking the tremor beneath. Jonas was already moving, his broad frame blocking the dim light from the hallway as he scanned their surroundings with a soldier's vigilance. "Stay alert," he commanded, voice low and steady. But even his calm couldn't mask the crack in his armor. I sank back onto the weathered armchair in the corner, the fabric worn and threadbare, and pulled my journal from my jacket. It had become my anchor in this place, the one tangible thing I could cling to as reality warped around us. But the pages, usually filled with my neat, careful script, now bore strange edition cryptic warnings I was certain I hadn't written. My heart thudded painfully as I traced the unfamiliar words, their meaning a puzzle wrapped in menace. "Look at this," I murmured, drawing the others close. Maya leaned over my shoulder, her sharp eyes scanning the pages. This isn't possible." "Maybe someone tampered with your journal," Samir suggested nervously, twisting the baseball cap in his hands. But his words sounded hollow, even to my ears. As we tried to rationalize the impossible, the manor seemed to respond. Doors slamming shut in distant corridors, the floorboards creaking beneath invisible footsteps. It was as if the house were listening, reacting to our every thought, our every whispered plan. Maya's equipment whined in protest, the electromagnetic readings spiking wildly. She cursed softly, tapping at her devices with frantic urgency. "The house is interfering with the tech. It's like it knows what we're trying to do." Leela stood nearby, her pale face drawn tight with fear. She clutched her sketchbook, the trembling of her hands betraying the calm she tried to project. "It's not just the house," she whispered, eyes darting to shadows that no one else seemed to see. "It's alive, it's aware." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. A sentient entity feeding off our fear and memories, twisting them until we were prisoners of our own minds. The room shifted subtly, the corners darkening, the walls seeming to bow inward. The air thickened, stifling and cold. The manor was no longer a place we could simply explore or escape. It was an adversary, a predator stalking us within the labyrinth of its own design. "We need to stick together," Jonas said, his voice a lifeline in the growing chaos. "This thing wants to isolate us, to pick us off one by one." "But how?" Maya asked, eyes wide. "If it can rewrite our memories, change the layout, and even alter what we write, what's left that's real?" I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to focus. The journal in my lap was both a weapon and a weakness. If the house could manipulate even my written thoughts, then the line between what was mine and what belonged to the manor was dangerously blurred. A sudden crash from the hallway made us jump. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as if the house was mocking our fear. Leela's voice trembled as she began to chant softly, her mediumship a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. We moved as one, a fragile unit bound by desperation, trying to navigate the shifting corridors that no longer obeyed the laws of logic or memory. Each turn brought new terrace phantoms of the past, distorted reflections of ourselves, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. In the quiet moments between the chaos, I returned to my journal, searching for clues in the cryptic warnings that now filled its pages. The house was speaking to us in its own twisted language, and we had no choice but to listen. But hearing was not the same as understanding, and understanding was the only way out. As the manor's walls seemed to close in, I realized that the fight was no longer just to escape the building, but to reclaim our minds from its insidious grasp. The house was listening, and it was waiting. I forced my eyes open, the dim light flickering around me like a dying flame. Tomorrow we would try again, but tonight all I could do was write, because if the house could change what I wrote, then maybe, just maybe, I could change how the story ended. And that was a promise I intended to keep. Outside the faint glow of the manor's windows, the night deepened. Somewhere, far from the prying shadows and shifting halls, the world continued unaware of the nightmare trapped within. But inside, the house whispered, listened, and waited for its next move. And so did we. The recorder lay between my knees, headphones snug over my ears, and I strained to make sense of the sounds that emerged from the tiny speaker. At first, there was only static, a faint hum of electrical interference, a familiar, almost comforting background noise amid the palpable unease that had settled over us like a suffocating fog. But then, beneath the static, something else stirred, a low, distorted whisper, fractured and alien, weaving through the white noise like a thread of cold, dark silk. I jerked upright, heart hammering, as the voice or whatever it was seemed to curl around my consciousness, tugging at the edges of my reason. It was unlike any familiar language, more a texture than a message, a sound that slid just beyond comprehension, teasing the limits of perception. My fingers trembled as I fumbled to rewind the playback, desperate to confirm what my ears had caught. Dr. Marks's earlier scoffs echoed faintly in my memory, her rational skepticism, a tether I'd clung to since we stepped inside this accursed manor. But now, that tether frayed dangerously. "Elliot," Maya's voice broke through the silence, trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. She crouched beside me, her eyes wide and unblinking. "You need to hear this." I handed her the headphones, watching as she pressed play. The same indecipherable murmuring seeped out, as if the manor itself had whispered to us through the fragile veil of technology. Maya's scientific rigor had been a steady force within the team, her questions probing and precise, her faith in evidence unshakable. Yet now, as the strange sounds filled the air, I saw the flicker of doubt in her gaze, the subtle shift in her posture that betrayed a shattering conviction. Jonas appeared at the threshold of the hall, his broad frame casting a looming shadow. "What the hell is that?" His voice was rough-edged with suspicion. "Some kind of trick?" Maya shook her head, swallowing hard. "No, I don't know. It's something else. Something not natural." The room seemed to close in around us, the walls pulsing faintly like a living organism. Samir hovered near the equipment, pale and wide-eyed, clutching his baseball cap as if it would shield him from the unknown. Dr. Marks emerged from the shadows, her expression unreadable but her skepticism now tinged with unease. "We need to consider all possibilities," she said carefully, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "But this defies everything we understand." Tensions ignited like kindling in the dry air. Jonas's protective instincts flared, his distrust sharpening into accusation. "We can't just accept ghost stories. We need facts, not phantoms." Maya's reply was swift, her voice edged with frustration. "And you think ignoring this will help? We're trapped in a place that twists reality. Maybe it's time to admit that not everything can be explained by science alone." The group fractured in that moment, the fragile unity splintering under the weight of fear and uncertainty. I watched his old wounds surface: Jonas's distrust, Maya's crumbling skepticism, Leela's retreat into silence. The manor's malevolent presence pressed in, exploiting every fissure. Lila, pale and trembling, withdrew to a shadowed corner, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. Her fingers traced frantic lines, capturing the visions that haunted her sleep and waking hours alike. "It's coming," she whispered, eyes darting wildly. "The house is showing me something terrible." I approached cautiously, the oppressive atmosphere thickening around us. Her drawings depicted a dark, looming figure, an embodiment of the manor's sentient malice, waiting patiently in the shifting shadows. Her voice quivered as she warned, "We're running out of time. This confrontation, it won't wait." The weight of her words settled over me, a cold certainty in the pit of my stomach. I returned to my journal, the familiar act of writing a fragile anchor amid the chaos. But even as I scribbled down fragmented thoughts and observations, the manor seemed to pulse with awareness, the warped doorway nearby throbbing with subtle life. Outside, the night deepened, swallowing the last vestiges of hope. Inside, the house whispered promises of terror and despair, feeding on our fears as it prepared to claim us. We stood on the precipice of something irreversible, the line between reality and nightmare dissolving beneath our feet. As I closed my journal, my hand shaking, a single question echoed relentlessly in my mind. What were we truly facing inside the house that dreamed? And would any of us survive the answers? The breaking point had come, and there was no turning back. The oppressive silence of the manor was shattered by a sudden, sharp crack echoing through the hall. Maya yelped, dropping her equipment, the eerie recording still playing faintly from the speakers. Jonah spun toward the sound, muscles tensed, eyes scanning the shifting shadows. "Stay alert," he barked, voice low and urgent. "This place isn't just playing tricks anymore." I felt the cold sweat bead at my temples, each breath shallow and uneven. The manor's walls seemed to breathe around us, expanding and contracting in time with the pounding of my heart. Every creak, every whisper, every flicker of movement was magnified, feeding the growing dread that wrapped around us like a suffocating shroud. Maya's hands trembled as she tried to recalibrate her devices, her fingers fumbling over buttons with a desperation that bordered on panic. "There's something here," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Something alive." Lila's eyes met mine, wide and haunted. "It's more than alive," she murmured. "It's waiting, watching, feeding on us." I swallowed hard, feeling the fragile threads of our sanity unraveling. The manor was no longer just a place. It was a predator, a sentient entity that had ensnared us in its web. And as the shadows lengthened and the whispers grew louder, I knew the true nightmare was only just beginning. We gathered in the cramped command center, the flickering glow of monitors casting harsh light on weary faces. Maya played the recording again, the strange, indecipherable sounds filling the cramped space with an otherworldly presence. "We can't ignore this," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "It's proof the manor is more than just old wood and stone." Jonah shook his head, jaw clenched. "Proof or not, we need to find a way out before it's too late." Dr. Marks adjusted her glasses, her usual composure shaken. "We must remain objective," she said firmly. "Fear clouds judgment." But the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with unseen menace. Lila's whispered warnings echoed in my mind, the sketches in her book a haunting roadmap of the horrors to come. I looked around at my team, fractured, frightened, but still fighting. We faced a darkness that defied reason, a house that dreamed in shadows and fed on our very souls. And in that moment, I realized the only way forward was through the nightmare itself. As the chapter closed, the manor's pulse quickened, the shifting corridors humming with anticipation. The breaking point had shattered our illusions. There was no denying the house's sentience, no escaping the creeping dread that clawed at our minds. Ahead lay a confrontation that would test our sanity, our courage, and our very humanity. And I, Elliot Harper, was determined to see it through no matter the cost. Every step I took was hesitant, as if the floor beneath me might give way or shift, swallowing me whole into some bottomless void. The hallway stretched and contracted, light flickering uncertainly through cracked windows, casting long shadows that crawled like living things along peeling wallpaper and broken moldings. I paused, hands resting on the rough plaster walls, my fingers trembling as a distant sound drifted, a soft laughter, impossibly familiar and achingly distant. It was her, my sister's voice, light and taunting, echoing through the corridors of my fractured mind. The manor had always been a place of silence, of stillness, But now it seemed to breathe with memories, with echoes of the past that clawed at my sanity. I closed my eyes, willing the sound away, but the laughter only grew louder, twisting into cries and whispers that threatened to unravel me. Behind me, the faint shuffle of footsteps stirred my senses. Maya's calm voice crackled over the coms, but her usual scientific certainty was fraying at the edges. "Elliot, are you there? The readings, they're spiking again. I don't know what to make of it." I swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility anchoring me momentarily. "I'm here. Keep your eyes open." But even as I spoke, the manor seemed to mock us, its architecture folding in on itself. The corridor looped back impossibly, doors appearing where none had been before, staircases spiraling into darkness or vanishing entirely. Time lost meaning. Clocks found in the shattered remains of a forgotten parlor spun wildly, their hands chasing each other in frantic circles. Voices overlapped our own, distorted, mingled with those of the forgotten souls trapped within these walls. Jonas's voice broke through the chaos, sharp and protective. "Stay close. Don't split up. This place is playing with our heads." Lila's trembling form appeared in the dim light, eyes wide and haunted. "It's too much," she whispered, clutching her sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. "The visions, they won't stop. They're here, with us." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing quietly, and for a moment, the oppressive silence returned, pressing down on us like a physical weight. I knelt beside her, struggling to keep my own panic at bay. The house was not merely a building. It was a predator, feeding on our fears, twisting our memories into weapons against us. Samir's breath came ragged as he fumbled with the equipment, screens flickering erratically, sensors blaring alarms that made no sense. "Nothing's working right," he muttered, eyes darting nervously. "It's like the house is scrambling the signals." Maya crouched beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to stabilize the readings. "We need to find some pattern, some anchor. Otherwise, we'll drown in this madness." The air grew thick with tension. Jonas scanned the shifting shadows, his jaw clenched, muscles coiled for defense. Whatever it is, it's not just messing with our heads, it's trying to break us down. I felt the weight of my own memories pressing in images of my sister's face, her last moments, the questions that had driven me here in the first place. The house had become a mirror, reflecting not just the horrors of this place, but the darkness within ourselves. In that moment, I questioned everything. Was I losing my mind? Was this all some elaborate trick of the house? Or was it the unraveling of my own psyche? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I feared there was no way back. The manor whispered promises and threats, its architecture folding like a cruel puzzle designed to trap us forever. And as I stood amidst the shifting walls, I knew the descent into madness was no accident. It was the house's ultimate weapon. But surrender was not an option. Not yet. The fight for our sanity, for our very lives, had only just begun. I glanced at my journal, the pages that once held my thoughts now seeming alien, the words shifting beneath my gaze. The house was rewriting my memories, twisting the past into something unrecognizable. I clenched my fists, determined to hold on to the fragments of reality still within reach. "We can't let it win," I whispered to the empty hallway, the echo of my own voice, a fragile tether to what was true. Outside, the manor loomed silently, its dark windows watching, waiting. And inside, we were trapped, lost in a labyrinth of fear, memory, and madness that threatened to consume us all. The night stretched endlessly, and with it, the creeping dread deepened, wrapping around me like a shroud. I fought to keep the darkness at bay, but the house was patient. It would wait, and it would feed, until there was nothing left but the hollow shells of those who dared to enter. And so the descent continued into madness, into the dream that was not a dream, until all that was left was the silence of the house and the shattered fragments of our minds. I sat cross-legged on the cracked wooden floor, watching Lila as she slipped deeper into one of her visions. Her eyes were closed, but behind her lids, I could see the faint glow of something unnatural, shimmering images flickering like fragile ghosts in the corners of her mind. The air around her thickened, charged with a heavy sorrow that seeped into the room like mist. "I see them," she murmured softly, her voice trembling. "Faces. People who lived here, suffered here. Their pain is still here, like a stain on the walls." Maya adjusted the microphone on the small tripod nearby, her sharp eyes flicking between Leela and the equipment. "Are you sure you're okay? This feels intense." "It's more than intense," Leela replied. "It's like the house is showing me its memory, every tragedy, every loss." Jonas stood nearby, his broad frame a protective barrier between us and the encroaching darkness. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting them to leap out at any moment. "We need to be careful," he said gruffly. "Whatever's here, it's feeding off all this pain." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in my chest. The manor was no longer just a building. It was a vessel, a receptacle of centuries of misery and madness. And now, it was awakening in response to us. After Lila's vision faded, we gathered around a small wooden table littered with brittle pages. Maya had found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, small cache of journals and letters, preserved by time but stained with age and despair. I gingerly flipped open the first volume, the musty scent of decay filling my nostrils. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled in hurried strokes that betrayed the writer's mounting terror. The pages recounted the slow unraveling of a family who had once called this place home, stories of loss, mental breakdowns, and whispered accusations of a malevolent presence that warped their minds. Each entry drew us deeper into the manor's dark history, revealing a cycle of trauma that had repeated itself across generations. "This isn't just folklore," Dr. Marks said, her skeptical tone softened by the weight of the evidence. "There's a pattern here of people who come here lose themselves, consumed by their own fears and memories." Samir's fingers trembled as he checked the recordings, his youthful face pale under the flickering light. "Listen to this," he said, pressing play. Faint whispers drifted from the speaker-fragmented voices that rose and fell like distant cries, layered over a low, almost inaudible hum that sent chills down my spine. "It's like the house is speaking," Maya breathed, her usual scientific detachment giving way to awe and fear. I felt a cold pressure in my chest, a suffocating presence that seemed to press against my very thoughts. The manor was not merely a place. It was a live and ancient entity built from the anguish of those who had suffered within its walls. It shaped itself not just physically but psychically, twisting memories and fears into new, horrific realities. Lila's voice broke the silence. "It's feeding on us, all of us. Our memories, our pain. The more it takes, the stronger it becomes." Jonas tightened his grip on the flashlight, his protective instincts flaring. "Then we have to find a way to stop it, or at least get out." But escape was becoming less certain with every passing moment. The manor's shifting corridors seemed to pulse with malevolence, warping time and space until the familiar became alien. The house was a labyrinth born of trauma, and we were its prey. As night deepened, the whispers grew louder. Shadows lengthened and twisted, and the air thickened with the scent of decay and forgotten grief. We were no longer just investigators, we were prisoners of a dark history that was still alive, still hungry. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the fragments of reason that remained. But the manor's memory was relentless, a tide of sorrow and madness that threatened to drown us all. And in the depths of that sorrow, a question gnawed at me. How much of myself would I lose before the house claimed me too? The room seemed to close in, the walls breathing with a life of their own. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint cry echoed a reminder that the whispers of the forgotten would never truly be silenced. We were trapped not only in the manor but in its endless, shifting nightmare, and the house was waiting, patient and hungry, for the next chapter to begin. We had thought the early shifts were mere quirks, small deceptions played out in the shadows of forgotten halls. But now, as the walls groaned and slid around us, it was clear the house was tightening its grip. We stood at the end of a narrow passage, the dim light from our torches flickering against the warped surfaces. The air felt thick, heavy, as if pressing in on us from all sides. I could hear the uneven breaths of my Tamaya's sharp inhales, Jonas's steady exhalations, Leela's quiet murmurs as she clung to the edges of her visions. Even Samir seemed subdued, his nervous glances betraying the growing unease we all shared. "This isn't right," I murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "We mapped this corridor an hour ago. It didn't twist like this then." Maya peered at her handheld device, the screen sputtering with static. The readings are all over the place. The electromagnetic field is fluctuating wildly and the sensors keep losing signal. Jonas tightened his grip on the flashlight, scanning the shadows ahead. His broad frame was a steady presence, but even he looked strained. "We need to keep moving. The house isn't going to wait for us to figure this out." As we advanced, the manor's shifting nature became impossible to ignore. The floor beneath our feet seemed to pulse subtly, as though breathing with a life of its own. The walls whispered, faint voices weaving through the silent echoes of memories, of pain, of long-forgotten tragedies. Lila clutched her sketchbook tighter, her pale face drawn, eyes flickering with the visions she tried to contain. Suddenly, a flicker caught my Arja movement at the edge of the hallway. Jonas reacted instantly, stepping forward and blocking the path with his bulk. A translucent figure of a child appeared, eyes hollow and searching. It reached out, a silent plea frozen in time. "Stay back," Jonas growled, voice low and firm. "It's not real." The apparition wavered, dissolving into mist, but the chill it left behind seeped into our bones. "It feels so real," Maya whispered, voice trembling as she adjusted her recorder, "like it's meant to draw us in." I nodded, swallowing down the rising panic. The house is using our fears against us. We have to stay focused. But focus was slipping through my fingers like smoke. The equipment faltered, the walls shifted with cruel unpredictability, and the air grew colder still. Maya's fingers danced over her devices, recalibrating, trying to capture something that defied explanation. "I can't get a stable reading," she said, frustration creeping into her tone. "It's like the house is scrambling the signals." Samir shifted uneasily, clutching a bundle of cables. "We need a plan that doesn't rely on technology," he said quietly. "This place is breaking it." Dr. Marx's skeptical voice cut through the tension. "Or perhaps the phenomena aren't as paranormal as you think. There could be natural explanations, magnetic distortions, structural shifts, but the emotional toll is undeniable." Her words offered little comfort. The manor's malevolence was palpable, an oppressive presence that seeped into our minds and hearts. I felt the weight of my own buried grief pressing down, memories of my sister flickering at the edges of consciousness, now more vivid, more painful than ever. "We need to move," I urged, leading the team down another corridor that seemed to stretch and narrow with every step. The walls here were adorned with peeling wallpaper, but faint outlines of faces emerged, ghostly impressions of past victims trapped in the manor's memory. Their silent pleas echoed in the spaces between our footsteps. Lila stopped, trembling. "They're here," she whispered. "Their pain, their fear, it's all around us." Jonas's eyes hardened. "Then we fight. We don't let this house own us." But even as he spoke, the corridor twisted again, the exit vanishing as if swallowed by the house itself. Panic threatened to surge, but I forced it down. We had to hold on to each other, to reality, to the fragile thread of hope that still lingered. The manor was no longer just a building. It was a predator, a nightmare that fed on our fears and memories. And as the maze tightened, we knew the worst was yet to come. I glanced back at my teammate's determined eyes flicked between her failing equipment and the shifting walls. Jonas's protective stance, Lila's pale countenance etched with anxiety, and Samir's nervous grip on his gear. We were trapped, no doubt, but we were not yet defeated. "Keep moving," I said, voice steady despite the dread that churned inside. "We find a way out, together," and with that fragile resolve, we stepped deeper into the house's twisted heart, unaware of how far it would push us, or how much of ourselves we would lose in the labyrinth's embrace. The maze had tightened. There was no turning back now. Every breath was a labor, every heartbeat a hammering drum in the silence that pressed against the walls. We had reached a point where the house no longer merely shifted rooms or toyed with our senses. It had begun to manifest our fears, carving them into the very fabric of this place, like an artist painting nightmares onto a canvas of darkness. I moved cautiously down the dim corridor, the weak beam of my flashlight trembling in my grip. The walls, once cracked and peeling, now pulsed subtly, as if the house itself were breathing. Then, through the haze of shadows, a shape emerged, fragile, flickering, but unmistakably her, Anna, my sister. The image was so vivid, so achingly real, that I stumbled back, swallowing a gasp. She stood at the edge of a pool of dark water, her small hands trembling as she reached out. Her eyes, wide and filled with fear, locked onto mine. "Elliot," she whispered, voice fragile as a breeze. The corridor warped around her, the stale scent of damp wood mixing with the metallic temps of blood. I wanted to scream, to reach through the apparition and pull her back from that moment, the moment I had buried deep inside me for years. But she dissolved before my eyes, leaving only the echo of her voice and the gnawing ache of loss. Behind me, footsteps faltered. Leela's voice trembled in the darkness. "I can't, it's too much." I turned to find her in one of the small antechambers off the corridor, clutching her chest as if to hold her pounding heart. Around her, the air shimmered, and faint figures drifted like smoke whispers curling from their unseen lips, voices laden with sorrow and accusation. Her eyes darted wildly, pupils dilated with panic. "Leela," I called softly, stepping closer, but she shrank back, trembling. "You're not alone," she swallowed hard, voice breaking. "They're everywhere. They know everything, my fears, my failures. I can't shut them out." The room seemed to close in, shadows weaving between the apparitions, their forms stretching and distorting as if feeding on her fear. The house was turning her visions into a prison, and I felt a surge of helplessness. Nearby, Maya was hunched over her equipment, hands shaking as she recalibrated the devices that had once been her lifeline to reason. The soft hum of electronics was now punctuated by static bursts and distorted voices, a symphony of chaos that seemed to mock her attempts at scientific detachment. "Maya," Jonas called from the doorway, voice tense. "What are you picking up?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know. It's like the house is alive in the recordings. It warps the signals, corrupts the data. I can't make sense of it." Jonas's gaze flicked to the shadows beyond the doorframe. His broad shoulders tensed as a dark shape lunged forward, faceless and silent. He didn't flinch, but raised a fist, muscles coiling to strike. The apparition dissolved into smoke, but the weight of his survivor's guilt lingered, a shadow darker than any specter. "We can't keep fighting shadows," Jonas growled, voice low. "We have to face what this place wants from us." The manor seemed to pulse in response, walls shifting imperceptibly, corridors folding into themselves like a living labyrinth. Our fears, once locked inside our minds, now roamed free, stalking us through every turn and shadow. I gripped my journal, pages fluttering despite the still air. The entries I had made earlier twisted and changed before my eyes, words replaced by cryptic symbols and warnings. The house was rewriting our memories, reshaping our realities. "We need to hold on to what's real," I whispered to myself, voice barely audible. "Hold on to each other." But as Lila's sobs echoed down the hallway and Maya's devices sputtered into silence, I realized survival hinged not on escaping the manor's walls, but on confronting the darkness within ourselves. The house waited, patient and hungry, its nightmare architecture folding us ever deeper into its dream. And I wondered how many of us would emerge whole, and how many would be lost forever to the house that dreamed. The corridor ahead shimmered, the walls bending with impossible angles, as if inviting me to step deeper into the abyss. I took a shaky breath and moved forward, the weight of memory and fear pressing down like a stone. The nightmare was far from over. It was a pressure born not just of the shifting architecture, but of the unraveling bonds between us. We were fraying at the edges, each of us pulled by invisible threads tugged by the house itself. I tried to keep my voice steady as I addressed the group, though inside, the weight settled deeper with every passing moment. "Listen, we need to focus. The house is trying to get inside our heads, but we can't let it win. We have to stick together." Jonas shot me a glare. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tension ripple beneath his skin. "Focus. Maya's been shutting down half the equipment, and you're telling me to focus. This place is messing with our minds, Harper. We're better off splitting up or getting the hell out." Maya's eyes flashed, her usual calm replaced by a sharp edge. "Splitting up. That's exactly what the house wants. But I'm not sure staying here is any safer. The tech is failing because the house doesn't want us recording it. It's playing with the data, with our memories." The room seemed to contract, every glance loaded with suspicion. Leela sat huddled in a corner, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her sketchbook. Her eyes were wide, darting to shadows that shifted at the edge of her vision. She had been silent for a long time, her pale face betraying the storm inside. I stepped over to her, lowering my voice. "Leela, talk to me. What are you seeing?" She swallowed hard, trembling. "It's like the house is showing me things. Things I don't want to see. Faces, places, pain. It's overwhelming." Before I could respond, Dr. Marks interjected, her tone clipped and clinical. "What we're dealing with is psychological stress exacerbated by isolation and fear. We must not give in to hysteria." Her words fell like ice, but beneath her skepticism, I sensed a flicker of doubt. Even she wasn't immune to the house's creeping influence. Samir shifted next to her, pale and visibly shaken, clutching his cap as his eyes darted nervously. I don't know how much longer I can keep this together. Every time I check the gear, something's wrong. It's like the house is alive. Jonas growled, stepping closer. We're all on edge. But pointing fingers and losing our cool isn't helping. We need to find a way out before this place breaks us completely. The room descended into a cacophony of voices, accusations tangled with fear. I raised my hands, desperate to regain control. Enough, we're fracturing, and if we don't hold together, the house wins. I'm not going to let this place take us apart. But even as I said it, I felt the cracks spreading within myself. The weight of grief I carried, the loss of my sister, was clawing its way back up, tangled with the house's memories flickered unbidden. Her laugh, the last time I saw her, the silence after the accident. The house was using my pain like fuel. Later, alone in one of the manor's warped hallways, I leaned against the peeling wallpaper. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. My breath came shallow, heart pounding unevenly. I wanted to believe I was still the leader, the steady hand, but doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. In the dim light, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, my name, or was it hers? I closed my eyes, willing the voices to stop. But the house was not done with me. Back with the others, Leela's anxiety worsened. Her sketches grew darker, more frantic, lines smudging as if the visions themselves were bleeding onto the paper. It's coming, she whispered, eyes wild. The house. It wants us to break, to lose ourselves. Maya's skepticism was all but shattered. Her recordings captured strange noises we could neither explain nor ignore. This isn't just trickery, she admitted, voice tight. It's something alive, something that feeds off our fear. Jonas, usually stalwart, faltered under the weight of his own guilt and fear. His confrontations with unseen figures had left him raw, and now the fractures in our group made him wary of everyone. Dr. Marks's skepticism clashed with the palpable dread filling the air. Her presence was a stark reminder of the scientific world outside, a world slipping further away with each passing hour. The manor watched us, silent and patient, its shifting walls echoing the fracturing of our minds and hearts. We were unraveling. The question was, could we pull ourselves together before it was too late? The night deepened, and with it, the house's malignant presence grew stronger. I could feel it reaching into the darkest corners of my soul, twisting memories and fears into weapons against us. We have to hold on, I whispered to the empty hallway. We have to survive. But even as I said the words, a cold certainty settled over me. The house was winning, and our bonds might never be whole again. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the flickering lanterns, the manor shifted once more, folding us deeper into its labyrinth of dread and fractured memories. The nightmare was far from over. Or breathe, or hunger. But as I stood in that chamber, the air thick and cold as a tomb, every instinct screamed otherwise. The walls around me seemed to pulse like the slow, deliberate beating of a heart I could neither see nor touch. Shadows curled and stretched, twisting into faces I knew too well, my sister's smile, fractured by pain, the hollow eyes of lost friends, the echo of ghosts from my own past. The house that dreamed was no mere building. It was alive, and it was watching me. Maya's voice crackled over the radio, a tremor threading through her usually steady tone. Elliot, the readings, there's something wrong with the sensors. The hallway outside is stretching. Colors bleed like wet paint. It's like reality is melting. I could hear the disbelief, the trembling edge in her voice as she struggled to reconcile science with the impossible. I tried to keep calm, but the oppressive atmosphere clawed at the edges of my mind. Jonas was silent, his usual vigilance replaced by something raw and unguarded. When I found him, he was gripping a broken chair leg like a weapon, eyes wild and darting. "It's changing," he muttered, voice low and rough. "The corridors, doors vanish and appear. And then that thing, the figure from my nightmares, he's here." Jonas's confession shook me. The house wasn't just warping walls. It was dragging our pasts from the shadows and molding them into weapons against us. I wanted to tell him to stay strong, to hold on to what was real, but my own resolve was crumbling. Leela was barely holding herself together. She sat huddled in a corner, sketchpad in trembling hands, candlelight flickering against her pale face. Her mediumship had become a conduit for the manor's whispers, soft, urgent voices brushing her ears, demanding she see the truth. The house fed on us, on our memories, our fears, our pain. She looked up, eyes wide and haunted. "It's alive," she whispered. "It's hungry, and it knows us better than we know ourselves." The house seemed to respond to her words. The temperature dropped further, breath freezing in my lungs. The walls groaned, shifting imperceptibly, as if drawing closer. I could feel it probing my mind, sifting through my memories, my regrets, searching for the fractures to exploit. In the midst of this nightmare, I found myself alone once more. The others scattered, each trapped in their own hells, conjured by the manor's malevolence. The line between self and house blurred. I saw my sister's face in the flickering shadows, heard her voice calling me, accusing me, forgiving me. The house whispered secrets, promising release if I surrendered. But surrender was not an option. I clenched my fists, forcing the memories away, grounding myself in the present. This was no longer just a place. It was a predator, and we were its prey. If we were to survive, we had to understand it and fight back. The manor's revelation was a turning point, brutal and intimate. It had stripped away our illusions, revealing the raw core of our fears. We were isolated, fragmented, vulnerable. But knowledge was power, and now, more than ever, we needed to hold onto that fragile thread. Outside the chamber, faint sounds echoed a scream, a whisper, the scrape of something moving just beyond sight. The house waited, patient and cruel, ready to consume whatever remained of us. I steadied my breath. The fight was far from over, and somewhere deep within, I feared the house was already winning. The oppressive air pressed down like a physical weight as I moved through the shifting corridors. The house's heartbeat pulsed through the floorboards, each step echoing against walls that seemed to breathe and pulse. I caught a glimpse of Maya up ahead, her camera flickering with static and distorted light. She glanced back, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "Elliot," she whispered, voice barely audible. "This place, it's not just playing tricks, it's alive. It knows us. It's using our memories against us." I nodded, swallowing down the lump in my throat. "We have to find a way out before it breaks us completely." Jonas appeared beside me, breathing hard, eyes scanning every shadow. "I confronted that figure again," he muttered. "The one from my past. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was real part of the house. It wants me to crumble." Leela's voice trembled over the radio. "I'm trying to hold the visions together, but it's overwhelming. The house is feeding on everything, our fears, our pain. It's insatiable." Dr. Marx's skeptical tone cracked for the first time. "I don't know what to believe anymore. But whatever this is, It's beyond anything I've studied. Samir's frightened voice cut in. I don't think we're going to make it out if this keeps up. The manor's walls shifted again, the corridors warping in impossible angles. My own journal, my anchor to reality, felt fragile in my hands. The entries blurred, words twisting and changing. The house was rewriting our story as we lived it. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. The house was cunning, feeding on our memories, our fears, our doubts. But it was not invincible. Somewhere in this labyrinth was a weakness, a crack in the facade. We had to find it. The house waited, silent and patient, but so did we, and I vowed we would not be its next victims. The walls no longer felt like mere stone and wood. They were living, breathing entities, twisting and turning with malevolent intent. But despite the dread gnawing at our minds, we couldn't surrender, not yet. We had to try. Desperate measures, that was all we had left. We gathered in the largest remaining chamber that hadn't yet succumbed to the manor's labyrinthine distortions, a room cluttered with the equipment Maya had managed to keep operational against all odds. The flickering glow of monitors cast ghostly shadows over our faces, each of us marked by exhaustion and fear. Maya crouched by a tangle of wires, her fingers deftly adjusting dials and patching connections, her eyes sharp and unwavering despite the strain. If I can amplify the electromagnetic readings, she explained quietly, maybe we can map the shifts in real time, detect where the walls bend before they trap us again. Jonas stood by the doorway, broad shoulders squared, eyes scanning every inch of the darkened hallway beyond. His presence was our barricade against whatever specters or hallucinations might seep through the cracks of reality. Samir hovered near Maya, clutching a portable generator, his nervous energy palpable but contained. Meanwhile, Lila sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor, a stark contrast to the technical chaos around her. Her long, dark hair spilled over her pale face as she closed her eyes, murmuring incantations or prayers under her breath. The air around her seemed to thicken, charged with a presence we could not see but all felt. Shadows flickered at the edges of the room, dancing just beyond the reach of the weak light. I can feel it, Lila whispered, voice trembling. The house is watching, waiting. But I can push back just a little. Her mediumship was fragile, a thread connecting us to the unseen currents that pulsed beneath the manor's surface. It was a risky gambit, but one we had no choice but to take. I sat apart, journal open on my lap, the pages worn and fragile under my shaking hands. Every entry, every scribbled observation, was a lifeline to my own sanity. The manor had already twisted some of my notes, words rearranged, sentences altered. It was as if the house was rewriting our memories, trying to erase our pasts and replace them with its own nightmare. We have to keep recording, I said, voice hoarse but resolute. If the house is changing our memories, our perceptions, then this journal is all that ties us to the truth. Maya glanced up, eyes meeting mine. I've set the devices to log continuously. Any spatial anomalies, any changes in electromagnetic fields, if we can capture it, maybe we can predict it. Jonas cracked his knuckles, stepping closer, and I'll keep watch. No surprises on my watch. The plan was fragile, a patchwork of hope and desperation, but it was the only way forward. As the devices hummed to life, the manor responded immediately. The temperature dropped, icy fingers creeping along our skin. The flickering lights dimmed, shadows lengthening until they seemed to crawl and pulse with a sinister life. The walls groaned deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor beneath us. Lila's murmurs grew louder, her body tense, eyes squeezed shut. Suddenly, she gasped, jerking upright. "They're here," she said, voice barely a whisper. The memories, the pain, they're coming. From the corners of the room, shapes emerge, shifting forms that flickered like smoke. Faces, twisted in anguish, appeared and vanished. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, a primal terror clawing at my throat. But I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the journal in my hands. Remember who we are, I told the team. Remember what's real. Maya's fingers flew over her equipment, eyes darting between the screens. The readings there spiking. The house is reacting to Lila's presence. Suddenly, the walls rippled, as if a stone thrown into a still pond, and the room shifted. Furniture groaned as it twisted, the floor tilting beneath us. Jonas moved instantly, grabbing my arm to steady me. Hold on, he warned. The manor was fighting back. We braced ourselves against the assault, Maya desperately tweaking her devices to maintain the signal. Leela's voice rose in a chant, a desperate invocation against the encroaching darkness. I gripped my journal, tracing the words that anchored me, trying to drown out the whispers that threatened to unravel my mind. For a moment, the chaos paused, the manor's hunger suspended. We exchanged looks, fragile hope flickering in the gloom. We're not beaten yet, I said, but this is only the beginning. The house waited, patient and cruel, reshaping itself around us. And we, fragile and flawed, stood defiant, armed with nothing but faith, technology, and the raw human will to survive. Yet, deep down, I knew this gambit was a double-edged sword. Every challenge we posed would only stoke the manor's hunger, its malevolent intelligence growing sharper, more merciless. Our desperate measures were a beacon, shining briefly against the all-consuming darkness. But the question lingered, chilling and unanswered. How long could we hold that light before it was swallowed whole? The night stretched on, each second a battle against an invisible foe. And as the manor's walls shifted once again, I felt the fragile tether of reality strain tighter than ever before. Every step we took echoed with a hollow resonance, a reminder that this place was no mere structure but a living, breathing entity, one that fed on the dark corners of our minds and the fragile threads of our sanity. Jonas was the first to break the silence. His usual stoic demeanor cracked as he paused in a shadowed hallway, the faint glow from his flashlight barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. His breath came in ragged bursts, visible in the chill that pervaded the air. "I see him," Jonas muttered, voice low and rough. "That bastard from the war. The one I couldn't save." We gathered close, the others' faces pale and tense in the lantern light. Heidi watched Jonas suppress his demons for weeks, his aggression barely masked beneath a veneer of control. But here, in this twisting labyrinth of memories and fear, the house had peeled back his armor. The corridors seemed to stretch and contract as if alive, walls bending subtly out of sight. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a spectral silhouette, clad in the grime and fatigue of battle. Eyes hollow but accusing, Jonas's hand tightened around his weapon, knuckles white. "You left me," the apparition whispered, voice a ghostly rasp that chilled my very soul. Jonas swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. "No, I didn't." The figure's form flickered, a wavering spectre born of grief and guilt. The manor's influence was at its peak here, manifesting his trauma in cruel, tangible form. For a heartbeat, I feared Jonas would falter, consumed by the weight of the past. Instead, something shifted in him, a fierce resolve ignited behind his eyes. With a steadying breath, he stepped forward. "I survived because I have to. For them, for all of us." The apparition dissolved into mist, leaving a silence heavy with release. "That was something," Maya said quietly, wiping sweat from her brow. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the dials on her recorder, the equipment crackling with interference that no earthly explanation could account for. "This place is messing with our heads and machines," she added, eyes flicking nervously to the screens that displayed static and fleeting shadows. I nodded, flipping open my journal. The pages were a refuge, a fragile tether to reality as the manor's malevolence pressed in. But even my writing felt tainted. Words shifted and warped, as if the house sought to rewrite our very memories. "We need to hold on to something real," I murmured. "Our experiences, our truths." Lila sat nearby, her slender form curled against the wall, pale and trembling. Her sketchbook lay open, pages fluttering despite the still air, capturing the flickering images of past victims and unspoken horrors she saw in her visions. "It's getting worse," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Their pain, it's all around us. I can feel it, hear their screams in the silence." Samir, clutching his baseball cap, swallowed nervously. "How much longer can we keep this up? The manor's not just playing tricks, it's trying to break us." Dr. Marks adjusted her glasses, skepticism giving way to concern as even she could no longer deny the palpable dread that thickened the atmosphere. "We've crossed a threshold," she said grimly. "This house isn't just haunted, it's alive, and it's feeding on us." The realization settled over us like a shroud. The price of survival here was steep. Each moment spent within these walls demanded sacrifice. Our fears, our memories, our very identities were the currency the house demanded. As night deepened, the manor's attacks intensified. Doors slammed shut, trapping us in rooms that shifted mid-breath. Whispers clawed at the edges of our thoughts, sowing doubt and mistrust. Maya's recordings captured sounds beyond human comprehension, wails that bent space and time. Yet amidst the chaos, Jonas's confrontation sparked a fragile hope. His courage reminded us that the manor's hunger could be resisted, even if only momentarily. We began to move as one, combining our strengths, Maya's technology, Leela's visions, my journals, Jonas's protection, to carve out pockets of sanity within this nightmare. But the cost was mounting. Exhaustion gnawed at our edges, and the house's appetite grew ever more insatiable. It knew us now, feeding faster, twisting our memories into weapons against ourselves. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in a cracked mirror, eyes wide, haunted, but burning with determination. We might not survive this place unscathed, but giving in was no longer an option. We would pay the price, whatever it took, because to live meant to fight the darkness within and without, to face the manor's endless hunger with whatever flicker of light we still possessed. And so, in the heart of the shifting labyrinth, we prepared to stand our ground, each sacrifice a testament to our will to endure. The house might dream, might feed and grow, but we were not yet its prey. But even as hope flickered, I couldn't shake the creeping certainty that survival here demanded more than courage. It demanded a surrender to the very fears we fought to escape, a surrender that might cost us everything. The house was hungry, and it was far from done with us. My journal lay open before me, its pages no longer a simple record, but a cryptic map of shifting symbols and fragmented sketches. Hours of poring over the altered entries had revealed a chilling pattern, a sequence hidden in the manor's architectural madness that repeated like some dark incantation etched into the very bones of this place. "Elliot," Maya's voice broke through the silence, shaky but urgent. She hovered near the doorway, her tablet glowing faintly in the gloom. "The readings from the last corridor sync with your symbols. It's like the house rearranges itself following this pattern, a cycle we might predict." I nodded, my fingers trembling slightly as I traced a looping figure on the page. If we can anticipate the shifts, perhaps we can break the cycle, find a way out before it traps us forever. Jonas appeared beside Maya, his broad frame tense, eyes darting nervously as he scanned the shadowed corners. "We can't afford mistakes," he growled. "This place wants us lost, wants us broken." Leela sat nearby, still as a statue, eyes closed, lips murmuring an incantation only she could hear. Her mediumship had become our guide through the manor's labyrinth, her visions a fragile lifeline threading us through memories and illusions. Each whisper from beyond seemed to carve a path in the shifting walls. Dr. Marks and Samir joined us, the former skeptical but visibly strained, the latter clutching his cap as if it anchored him to reality. The atmosphere between us was taut with a desperate hope, mingled with the knowledge that the house was watching, waiting. We moved as one, Maya's tablet lighting our way, Jonas's vigilant presence a shield against unseen threats. The corridors twisted and folded, walls breathing and pulsing like living flesh, but our steps grew surer. The manor's malevolence was no longer a random chaos, but a pattern we could read and, maybe, outsmart. "This way," I whispered, leading the team through a narrow passage that shimmered with spectral light. Leela's voice rose softly in a chant, the air thick with memories of those who had vanished here before us. Fear clung to every surface, but so did determination. In the moments when the manor's grip seemed to falter, when the shifting ceased long enough for us to glimpse a stable path, I felt a flicker of something I had not dared to hope for, freedom. But that hope was fragile. The boundary between what was real and what was remembered blurred further with each step. Faces from my past swirled at the edges of my vision, my sister's smile now twisted by the house's cruelty. The house fed on these memories, growing stronger, but we had found a weakness. Could we break the cycle and escape? Or were we doomed to be lost in the manor's endless nightmare, our memories devoured until nothing remained but fear? I pulled my journal close, the inked symbols glowing faintly in the dim light, and pressed forward. The house was alive, yes, but so were we. And sometimes, even the darkest labyrinth has an exit. "Stay close," I murmured. "Together," Maya replied, her voice steady. And with that, we stepped deeper into the shifting heart of the manor, breaking the cycle or breaking ourselves trying. It was no longer clear where the house ended and our minds began. The boundary dissolved like mist. I found myself wandering a corridor that stretched beyond reason, the walls lined with faded photographs of my sister, her smile ghostly, her eyes shifting with every passing second. The air was thick, weighted with the sorrow I had long buried. The whispers of her laughter and cries intertwined, a haunting lullaby that both comforted and tore at me. I reached out, fingers trembling, to touch the peeling paper, and the images rippled beneath my skin like a living thing. I was pulled into memories I had locked away, a birthday party, a sudden accident, the silence that followed. The house knew. It fed on my grief, distorting it, weaponizing it against me. Behind me, the faintest murmur of voices drew me back. The team was gathered in what should have been the grand parlor, but here the room pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Shadows bent at impossible angles, stretching and contracting like breathing entities. The floor beneath us throbbed like a heartbeat, syncing with the rapid pounding in my chest. Maya's equipment flickered erratically, displaying fragmented images that merged screams, laughter, and silence into a chaotic tapestry of sound and light. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the readings to the room's ever-shifting contours. Jonah stood by the doorway, broad shoulders tense, eyes scanning the darkness beyond. His usual blunt pragmatism faltered as distorted echoes of his past whispered threats no one else could hear. Leela sat cross-legged on the warped floor, feverishly sketching the spectral figures that danced just beyond the veil. Her hands trembled so violently her pencil threatened to break, yet she could not stop. The anxiety that had always lurked beneath her calm now spilled over, thick and suffocating. The visions she captured on paper seemed to bleed into reality, figures flickering between corporeal and ethereal, blurring the line between the living and the dead. Samir clutched his baseball cap tightly, his youthful face pale and drawn. The technical gear he managed refused to cooperate, screens glitching with static and fractured images. Each beep and distortion chipped away at his resolve, underscoring the house's relentless psychological assault. "We're losing ourselves," Maya whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of broken electronics. "This place, it's warping everything. Our memories, our senses, everything." I nodded, the words hitting like a punch to the gut. We were trapped in a labyrinth, not just of walls and corridors, but of fractured minds and haunting pasts. The manor was alive, a sentient predator feeding on the deepest parts of us, twisting every recollection and fear into a weapon. As I struggled to focus, the corridor behind me began to pulse with a dull red light. The photographs on the walls warped into grotesque parodies, miles twisted into screams, eyes bleeding shadows. I shuddered, the weight of loss pressing down harder than ever before. But with the pain came clarity. To survive, I had to face these memories, not run from them. The house's power lay in our denial, our fear. "Elliot," Lila's voice broke through the haze, soft but urgent. "You need to see this." She held up her latest sketch, a swirling mass of faces and shapes that somehow captured the manor itself, a living maze of trauma and forgotten sorrow. The lines pulsed with energy, and I could feel the oppressive presence coiling around us like a serpent ready to strike. "It's trying to trap us," Maya said, eyes fixed on the malfunctioning monitors. "But if we understand it, maybe we can fight back." The team exchanged wary glances, the fragile cohesion we'd built threatening to unravel under the weight of creeping dread. I took a deep breath, forcing my shaking hands to steady. "We need to remember who we are," I said, voice firm despite the storm raging inside me. "Not just what this house wants us to be." The manor responded immediately. The walls rippled, shadows twisting into faces, some familiar, others monstrous. The air grew thick, the scent of decay and forgotten times filling my lungs. The line between memory, dream, and reality blurred, and I felt myself teetering on the edge of madness. But somewhere beneath the terror, a quiet resolve took root. To escape this place, we had to navigate the echoes of our own minds, confront the ghosts within, and find a way back through the shifting nightmare. As the corridor stretched endlessly ahead, I stepped forward, feeling the weight of every lost memory and every whispered fear pressing in, but also the faintest glimmer of hope flickering in the darkness. The house waited, alive and watching, but I was no longer a passive victim. The battle for our minds had begun, and with it, the fragile thread of survival hung in the balance. Our bodies ached in ways that transcended mere fatigue, muscles trembling, joints stiffening, minds fraying at the edges. The flickering glow of Maya's equipment was one of the few lights sustaining us in the oppressive gloom, but even that was faltering. The monitors blinked erratically, capturing readings that no longer made scientific sense. Maya sat huddled beside the tangle of wires and screens, her sharp eyes weary yet unyielding. I caught her gaze as she stared at the erratic electromagnetic spikes and the strange audio feedback that defied every logical explanation she had ever held. "Elliot," she whispered, voice barely audible over the static crackling from the speakers. "I don't know what this is anymore. It's not just energy fluctuations or interference. There's something else. Something alive in here." I nodded slowly, the admission heavy between us. Maya's skepticism had been our anchor, the scientific lens through which we tried to interpret the inexplicable. But now, that lens was cracking under the weight of the supernatural we had encountered. "I've felt it, too," I admitted, my voice rough from disuse. "The manor isn't just a building. It's a living thing, breathing, watching, shaping itself." Lila sat nearby, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. Her usually pale complexion was ghostly now, her dark hair tangled and damp with sweat. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if she could see things we couldn't. She spoke in fragments, offering descriptions of visions that flickered like phantoms in her mind, hallways lit by flickering candlelight, doorways opening to endless darkness, faces from the past whispering warnings. Each vision came at a cost, a tremor of anxiety, a sudden shiver, the distant echo of cries that no one else could hear. "This way," she murmured, her voice both fragile and resolute. "The path will open where the light fades. Follow the shadows, but beware the walls that shift." We exchanged glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Could we trust her? The manor had already twisted our perceptions, fractured our realities. Yet Lila's guidance was all we had left. Jonas and Samir took the lead, their flashlights piercing the thick darkness as they moved cautiously ahead. Jonas's broad frame was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. Samir's youthful face was pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. The corridors stretched endlessly, the walls seeming to breathe and breathe, as if the manor itself inhaled and exhaled with malevolent intent. Behind them, Dr. Evelyn Marks sat quietly, her skeptical demeanor tempered by exhaustion. Even she could no longer deny the palpable dread that clung to the air, thickening with each passing moment. I tried to write in my journal, but the words felt hollow, the pen dragging across the paper as if resisting the truth I sought to capture. The manor's influence seeped into every corner of my mind, blurring the boundary between memory and nightmare. Images of my sister flickered at the edges of my vision, shadows that whispered of loss and regret. The air grew colder still, the silence punctuated only by the distant drip of water echoing through the labyrinthine halls. Every step we took seemed to stretch time, the manor's architecture warping around us, folding in on itself like a nightmare come alive. "Keep moving," Lila urged, voice trembling but steady. "The light is fading, but it's our only chance." We pressed on, each corridor a gauntlet of shifting walls and spectral illusions. The manor's hunger was insatiable, feeding on our fear, our memories, our very souls. Yet, amidst the encroaching darkness, a fragile ember of hope flickered, born from trust, from unity, from the will to survive. As we rounded a corner, the air shifted again. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with my own ragged heartbeats. I glanced at Maya, her eyes reflecting the glow of her malfunctioning instruments, and at Lila, whose pale hand clutched her sketchbook tightly, her visions guiding us through the maze. The fading light was all we had left, and it was enough for now. But the manor was patient. It waited, watched, and dreamed, ready to consume the next breath of hope that dared to cross its threshold. And so, with every step, We moved deeper into the heart of the nightmare. The fading light our only beacon against the ever-encroaching darkness. I stood at the center of a vast hall, the walls around me pulsating in slow, rhythmic waves as if the manor itself had a pulse. The wallpaper, once faded and peeling, now writhed with shadowy tendrils that slithered like living things, crawling and twisting along the surface. Faint whispers echoed from corners I couldn't see, voices indistinct but laden with grief and menace. I clenched my jaw, forcing my gaze forward. This was the last stand. Elliot, Leela's voice trembled behind me, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. She was seated on the cold floor, candlelight flickering across her pale face, her hands a blur as she sketched. The images poured from her pencil in fevered strokes, ghostly figures emerging from shadowy swirls, faces frozen in silent screams, hands reaching out in desperate supplication. The house didn't just feed on fear. It conjured it, manifested it, made it tangible through her visions. Jonas was nowhere to be seen, his absence a heavy weight on the room. Then a guttural roar tore through the silence, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps pounding against the floorboards. Jonas burst into the hall, eyes wild and breath ragged. Behind him, a grotesque apparition loomed, a distorted mirror image of himself. Twisted and malformed, eyes black voids, leaking shadows. The thing laughed, a chilling sound warped and broken, mocking the man's survivor's guilt, every cruel word a dagger to his spirit. "Get away from me," Jonas snarled, raising his fists, his voice shaking but resolute. The figure lunged, but Jonas met it with a ferocity born of desperation, each blow a strike against his own buried pain. The clash echoed through the hall, a violent dance of flesh and phantom, until the apparition dissolved into a mist of sorrow and rage. Nearby, Maya was bent over her equipment, fingers flying across buttons and dials as static crackled and hissed from the speakers. Her voice was steady, calm amid the chaos as she broadcasted a counter-frequency designed to disrupt the manor's psychic influence. The air around her shimmered, warping and twisting, but she held firm, a fragile beacon of hope against the relentless storm. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything: the house, the memories, the fears that had clawed at me since the moment we'd stepped inside. Then, from the depths of the shifting shadows, a figure emerged. It was Hermione's sister, her face pale and ethereal, eyes filled with that same haunting sadness I'd tried so hard to forget. She reached out, voiced a whisper that felt like 1,000 broken promises. "Elliot, come home." I wanted to run, to scream, to deny the pain she dredged up, but I stood my ground. "No," I said, voice cracking but firm. "I'm here. I'm not lost anymore." The manor trembled, the walls shaking as if enraged by my defiance. Shadows rised faster, voices rising into a cacophony of despair and fury. But amidst the chaos, a fragile calm settled within me. I wasn't alone. We weren't alone. Together, we fought, each of us confronting the darkest corners of ourselves, pushing back against the malevolent force that sought to devour us. The house screamed in fury, twisting corridors and shifting rooms in a frantic attempt to trap us forever. But our resolve hardened like steel forged in fire. Exhausted, wounded in body and spirit, we found a fleeting opening crack in the manor's armor through which we could flee. As we stumbled into the cold night air, the house behind us sighed and settled, its hunger quelled but far from sated. The manor waited, silent and watchful, already beginning to shift and reshape for the next victims. I glanced back once, shadows flickering behind shattered windows, memories and nightmares entwined in eternal dance. The house had taken much from us, but it had not broken us, not yet. And as dawn's pale light crept over the horizon, I realized this was only the beginning of a long, haunted reckoning. The night had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and lies I'd held onto for so long. Standing with Maya, Jonas, and Lila, I felt the weight of our shared ordeal, the fractures in our minds and the scars etched deep into our souls. But there was also a flicker of something precious, hope, perhaps, or the stubborn ember of survival. We had faced the house's darkest horrors and lived to tell the tale. Yet, the questions lingered. Could we ever truly escape? Could the ghosts within us ever be laid to rest? And what price would we pay for the knowledge we'd gained? The manor was more than a building. It was a living nightmare, a reflection of the darkest recesses of memory and fear. It was patient, it was hungry, and it waited. For now, we were free, but the shadows would follow, and the house that dreamed would dream again. The manor was collapsing behind me, shifting walls, twisting and contorting like some living beast desperate to keep its prey. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would burst from my chest. Every step forward felt like breaking a chain that had bound me for so long, each movement a desperate plea for escape. Behind me, the echo of the manor's shifting corridors reverberated through the night. The house groaned as ancient timbers creaked and stone walls slid silently out of place, sealing off the world I had known for weeks. I didn't dare look back, but the oppressive silence that followed was heavier than any noise. It was a silence charged with menace, as if the house itself mourned my departure, already plotting to ensnare the next souls brave or foolish enough to enter. Finally, with one last burst of effort, I burst through a door that crumbled under my hands, spilling me out into the night. The cold hit me like a wave, sharp and immediate, the grass slick with dew beneath my trembling fingers. I collapsed there, chest heaving, ears ringing with the sudden absence of the manor's suffocating presence. Moonlight bathed the twisted silhouette of the house, its gables and towers warped by the distance and darkness. It stood silent yet alive, a predator resting between hunts. I traced a shaky breath, feeling the weight of what I had left behind settle deep within my bones. The others, Maya, Jonas, Lila, Samir, even Dr. Marks, their faces flickered like ghosts in my mind. Did any of them make it out? Were they lost forever within the manor's labyrinth? The question gnawed at me, tight and unforgiving. My fingers sought the familiar weight of my journal, the fragile tether to sanity I had clung to throughout the ordeal. Pulling it from my coat, I flipped through the pages, breath-catching as the words twisted and warped before my eyes. The entries I had painstakingly recorded were mutated, ink bleeding into forms that seemed to pulse with some eerie life. The manor had not released me unscathed. It still toyed with my memories, corrupting the very fabric of my reality. Sitting there under the vast, cold sky, I realized the escape was only the beginning. The house's hunger for memory and fear had left marks etched into the deepest chambers of my mind. The nightmares would not fade, the shadows would not leave, and the fragile barrier between waking and dreaming would forever remain blurred. I closed the journal slowly, the weight of the experience pressing down like a shroud. Somewhere deep inside, the house waited silent, patient, and hungry, ready to reshape itself once more, to lure and trap the next dreamer who dared to cross its threshold. As dawn crept over the horizon, I rose to my feet, the cold morning air a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness I had left behind. But even as I walked away, the manor's silhouette burned into my vision, a permanent scar upon my soul. Freedom was mine, but at a price I was only beginning to understand. I whispered into the stillness. I escaped, but the house remains, and it waits. The weight of those words settled between the morning mist and the distant, watchful shadows, a chilling promise that the nightmare was far from over. The night before my escape had been a torment I can barely recall without shivering. The manor's labyrinth had closed in, corridors twisting impossibly, doors vanishing and reappearing like cruel illusions. I was alone, or so it seemed. Voices echoed just beyond hearing, shadows flickered in the corner of my eyes. My mind frayed as the house fed on my fears, each memory of my sister's death clawing its way to the surface, raw and unrelenting. I stumbled through a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls breathing with a slow, sinister pulse. Then, a sudden shifted door appeared where none had been before. It was my only chance. I pushed it open, the wood groaning, and plunged inside. The room was small, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb that cast grotesque shadows. In the center lay a dusty mirror, its glass cracked but reflecting my worn, haunted face. I stared, trying to steady my breath, when a whisper echoed behind me, soft, urgent, like a plea. I turned, but no one was there. Panic surged. I tore through the room, finding another door, then another. Each led me closer to the outside, though the manor fought with every inch, corridors folding back on themselves, stairs leading nowhere. Then, the final barrier, heavy door, barred by an unseen force. I pressed my hands against it, willing it to give, heart pounding in my ears. The house roared in protest, walls shuddering, but the door creaked open just enough. I slipped through, tumbling onto the cold earth beyond the house's grasp. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a death knell. Now, as dawn broke, I knew the manor was still there. It was not simply a place, but a living nightmare that I carried inside me, a shadow that would follow every step. Escape was not an end, but a beginning, year-long, haunting journey through the corridors of memory and fear. And somewhere, in the darkness, the house dreamed on. The manor's silhouette was stark against the faint light of dawn when the first responders arrived days later. They found no sign of the others, only traces of scattered equipment, half-burned notes, and the footprints of one man fleeing into the wilderness. I was taken to a hospital, my mind frayed but intact. The doctors spoke of exhaustion, hallucinations brought on by stress, but I knew the truth was far darker. At night, when the world grew quiet, the manor whispered to me through dreams and waking shadows. My journal, now safely locked away, still held the distorted memories, the evidence of a place alive and hungry. I am free, but I remain a prisoner of the house that dreamed, the house that waits. What remains now is a question I cannot answer. Can the mind ever truly shed the shadows cast by such a place? Or do we all carry within us a manner of shifting walls, feeding endlessly on our deepest fears and forgotten memories? The house waits, and so do I. Elliot sat hunched over his battered journal, the worn leather cover creaking softly as he flipped through the pages. The yellowed sheets were a patchwork of hurried scrawls, diagrams, and notes, his lifeline during the investigation that had almost consumed them all. But now, something was wrong. The words seemed to shift beneath his gaze, sentences rearranging themselves in subtle but unmistakable ways. A phrase that once read, "The East Wing corridors do not align," now twisted into "The East Wing hides truths unknown." The air thickened around him, a chill crawling up his spine as the realization settled. The manor had followed him here, embedding its influence deep within the very fabric of his memories. He closed the journal abruptly, swallowing hard. The creeping dread that had shadowed him inside the manor was no longer confined to that haunted space. It had seeped into his mind, a silent parasite thriving in the dark corners of his psyche. Across town, Maya sat cross-legged on the living room floor of her modest apartment, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. The final recordings from the manor played on a loop, the static-laden audio interspersed with faint whispers and unsettling bursts of white noise. Her fingers trembled as she rewound and replayed a particular segment where a voice indistinct but undeniably human seemed to murmur her name. "It's just interference," she muttered to herself, though the tightness in her chest betrayed her doubt. The scientific rigor that had once defined her approach was now tempered by a cautious acceptance of the supernatural. The manor had shattered her worldview, leaving her suspended between skepticism and belief. Meanwhile, Jonas pushed himself harder than ever at the gym. Each lift, each sprint was an attempt to drown out the ghosts that haunted his thoughts. His broad shoulders glistened with sweat, muscles taut and trembling as he repeated drills with military precision. Yet beneath the steely exterior, a storm raged, a tempest of survivor's guilt and unspoken fears that no amount of physical exertion could quell. Afterward, he sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The eyes staring back were tired, haunted by memories he tried desperately to forget. But deep down, a flicker of resolve remained. He would not let the house win. In a sunlit cafe, far from the shadows of the manor, Leela's hands moved frantically over a sketchpad. Her pencil strokes were erratic yet purposeful, capturing fleeting images that danced at the edge of her vision. Faces, places, moments, fragments of the house's dark history and her own tormented visions melded into haunting compositions. Her breath came in short gasps as she fought to hold on to the images before they dissolved into the ether. Each sketch was both a release and a torment, a fragile bridge between her anxiety and the hope that understanding these visions might bring some measure of peace. The team remained scattered, physically distant but forever linked by the shared nightmare of the manor. Dr. Evelyn Marks, ever the skeptic, had retreated into research, poring over archives and folklore in an attempt to anchor the experience in historical fact. Samir's nervous energy had given way to a cautious, watchful silence, his youthful eagerness tempered by the weight of what they'd endured. Elliot's phone buzzed, breaking the heavy quiet. A message from Maya: "We need to talk." "The recordings? There's more. I think the manor's not done with us." He stared out the window at the darkening sky, shadows lengthening like the fingers of the house itself, reaching for him still. The question lingered in the air: how could they ever escape the grip of a place that haunted not just the body, but the mind? The line between memory and reality remained perilously thin. The house waited, patient and silent, its architecture shifting unseen, ready for the next dreamers to wander its halls. And Elliot Harper, once a man seeking answers, was now a prisoner of the memories that refused to fade. The steady tap of rain against the window pane is oddly soothing, a rhythmic reminder of the world still moving beyond these walls. My journal lies open on the scarred wooden table before me, pages smeared and altered in ways I cannot explain. Words I wrote with certainty now seem to twist and warp under my gaze, as if the manor itself still reaches out, its shadow long and suffocating. The memories come unbidden, unrelenting. I picture her, my sister, her laughter echoing in sunlit fields, a sound so pure it almost makes me ache. But even that warmth is contaminated now, bleeding into the cold, shifting corridors of the house that trapped us. The edges of the memory blur, the sunlit grass folding into the manor's decaying walls, the laughter twisting into something else, something sinister. I close my eyes, trying to hold on, but the images slip through my fingers like smoke. I wonder, with a shudder, if the house ever truly left me, or if I carry it inside, a parasite feeding on every fragile memory I possess. Days pass in a fog of uncertainty. I meet Maya and Jonas in a quiet cafe, an oasis of normalcy amid the chaos. Their faces mirror my own exhaustion, the lines around their eyes deepened by sleepless nights and haunted thoughts. Our conversations are tentative, often interrupted by long silences filled with unspoken fears. We each grapple with the invisible wounds, the manner-inflicted wounds, that no amount of distance seems to heal. Maya's eyes, once sharp with scientific certainty, now carry a cautious, wary gleam. Jonas, ever the protector, seems smaller somehow, weighed down by the guilt and helplessness he never voiced inside the house. Even Lila, whose sensitivity brought us comfort during the darkest hours, is distant, her gaze flickering as if haunted by unseen presences. I try to explain the journal, the way its pages changed, the words rearranged by forces beyond comprehension. Maya listens, skeptical but open, while Jonas shakes his head in frustration, unable to accept that reality could be so malleable, so cruelly deceptive. That night, I dream again of the manor, its walls breathing and folding around me like a living thing. The corridors twist and stretch, impossible angles folding into one another, drowning me in a labyrinth without end. Through the shadows, I hear her voice, soft, familiar, calling my name. It is both a balm and a torment, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I wake, gasping, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. The line between nightmare and waking life is thinner than ever, and I fear it will not hold much longer. The days stretch on, each one a battle to hold on to what is real. Sometimes I catch myself talking to her, whispering apologies into the empty air, as if she might answer. I know it is madness, but the manor's influence lingers, a stain upon my mind that refuses to fade. I write in a journal again, though the words feel hollow, shadows of thoughts I can barely grasp. I wonder if I am the last to remember truly, or if the house will one day consume even these fragile threads of consciousness. The mirror mocks me, reflecting a face I barely recognize, haunted eyes, taut and weary. A man forever changed by a place that should have remained forgotten. I touch the glass, searching for some sign of myself beneath the surface, but find only a stranger staring back. Is this what survival means? To carry the weight of the past, to be haunted by memories that may no longer be your own? I do not have answers, only the creeping dread that the house waits still, patient and silent, its architecture shifting just beyond the edges of perception, ready to reach out again. I am left with the question that haunts me most. How can I ever know what is truly real when the very fabric of memory is a playground for nightmares? And with that question, the shadows lengthen and the night deepens. Outside, the city hums with life, oblivious to the battles waged in quiet rooms and fractured minds. I rise from the chair, the journal clutched tightly in my hands, and stare out at the rain-soaked streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wells a sharp, urgent sound that cuts through the stillness. I am alive, I am free, but at what cost? The house waits, and I fear it will not wait forever. This is not the end. Not yet. The nightmare continues. I only hope I can find the strength to face it. The line between memory and nightmare is thinner than I ever imagined, and I am trapped somewhere in between. I close the journal, the weight of the words pressing down on me like the manor's own breath. Tomorrow, I will try again to piece together what remains of myself. But tonight, I am left with the haunted reflections of a past that refuses to die. I watched from the threshold, body numb, heart hollow, as the first grey tendrils of morning crept over the twisted spires and broken windows. The house that dreamed was quiet, now too quiet, but I knew better. The silence was not peace. It was the waiting breath of something patient, ancient, and hungry. The air tasted of cold, stone, and dust, thick with the residue of memories long consumed. The manor's walls, scarred and peeling, seemed to pulse subtly, an imperceptible movement that teased the edge of perception. I blinked, and the hallway I had just walked seemed to stretch and warp, the doorways shifting their places like a serpent shedding skin. The house was alive, breathing in the dark, folding itself like a labyrinthine riddle with no answer. Inside my pocket, I felt the weight of the journal. Its leather cover was cracked, smeared with grime, the edges curling as if warped by unseen hands. I pulled it out, fingers trembling, and flipped through the pages. The words I had painstakingly written, my anchor to reality, were distorted, sentences twisted into unfamiliar shapes. The house had rewritten my memories, folding them into its own malevolent narrative. "Why do you resist me?" a voice whispered, not in the air, but inside my mind. It was the house, or perhaps my own fractured psyche speaking through its walls. "Your memories feed me. Your fears sustain me." I pressed the journal to my chest, fighting the urge to collapse. Every step I had taken inside these cursed halls had been a descent into madness, a peeling away of self. The faces of my teammates haunted Mamaya's hopeful eyes, now clouded, Jonas's clenched fists trembling with desperation, Leela's fragile sketches bleeding shadows into reality. They were gone, lost to the house's insatiable hunger. Outside, a cold wind stirred the skeletal branches of dead trees. The manor seemed to breathe with the wind, its shutters banging softly like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like roots sinking into the earth. Here, in this place, time was a trick, memory a weapon, and fear the currency with which the house bought eternity. I whispered into the emptiness, "I see you. I see what you are." The walls shifted again, a subtle folding that made the front door vanish from sight. The manor was reshaping itself, preparing for its next guests, its next feast. Somewhere deep inside, the echoes of past screams mingled with whispered regrets and forgotten names, tapestry of trauma woven into the very stones. I turned away, the first rays of sun striking my face, burning away the night's chill but not the shadow in my soul. The house waited, patient and eternal, a monument to the darkest corners of the human mind. And though I had escaped its physical grasp, its mark would never leave me. Memory is a fragile thing, pliable and elusive. The manor had taught me that. It feeds on what we fear to remember, twisting it until we are lost. And in that loss, it grows stronger. I walked away, but the house was behind me, in every lingering doubt, every trembling breath, every restless dream. It waits still, and it will wait forever.